I'm Camille Pauley. I am the president of Healing the Culture, which is a pro-life international organization that is based in Seattle, Washington area. And we have outreaches all over the country and all over the world. We have a branch in India and in Canada, in the United Kingdom, and in Africa, in Nigeria. And our mission is to help people articulate why be pro-life to their friends, to their neighbors, to their fellow students, to their associates, in a way that makes logical sense, that is not emotional, that is not based on your sensibilities, that is not based on graphic images, but gets people to think. How many of you have ever dialogued with somebody on abortion? Raise your hand. Almost everybody. Okay, so when you dialogue with people on abortion, what do you find to be the most difficult thing? What's the hardest thing for you when you talk about abortion with somebody else who's not the same belief as you?
Fine.
Yeah.
The emotion, when you might be going from the position from a logical standpoint and they're coming from an emotional standpoint. It's hard to balancing level.
Very good. And you?
Finding something like to start off on common ground with and then go from there. It's kind of hard to find what's the actual definition.
So the emotions, finding common ground on something, we all have different definitions. What are the most difficult questions you encounter from other people or challenges you encounter from that are difficult to answer? What do you think are the most common things people say when they're supporting abortion that you find difficult to answer? What do you think?
The exceptions.
The exceptions, rape and incest, life of the mother, the disabilities of the child. What about homelessness? What about overpopulation? What about you?
Who are you to say what they can do?
Who are you to say what to do with my own body? We're going to handle all of these questions today. And the whole purpose of Life Advocacy Student Training is to equip you with two things. Number one, a new language of how to talk about pro-life in a way that is not emotional, not graphic, not dependent on statistics or facts or slippery slopes. Why do we want something else to add to all of that? Because it's very easy for people who support abortion, for people who are pro-choice, to just simply throw another statistic in your face or give you another fact. And then you're fighting fact on fact and statistic on statistic. And when you're debating emotionally, it's very easy for somebody to just come back emotionally. And if the argument is an emotional argument against an emotional argument, you get nowhere, as I'm sure you probably have experienced, right? But when you can find common ground with somebody, and you can start at definitions that make sense to both of you, definitions about what's really important in life, right? Love, happiness, success, suffering, quality of life, freedom, right? All these important words that we all care about so much. If you can find common ground on that, then you can open up a door and help someone walk through it in a way that is not emotional, that doesn't depend on my statistic versus your statistic. Because here's what's wrong with statistics. Even if I were to prove that women, every single woman gets injured because of an abortion, emotionally, psychologically, physically, our opposition would still say abortion should be legal anyway. And they're moving in that direction because they're saying sometimes you have to commit a harm in order for something else good in your life to happen, right? Sometimes you have to commit a harm in order for good things to happen, or sometimes there has to be suffering or someone has to die in order to avoid slavery, right, or anti-freedom. And so it wouldn't matter in the end if your statistics are better than their statistics. In the end, somebody who really wants an abortion and thinks that that's what's gonna bring them happiness and avoid suffering, they're gonna get an abortion if it's legal, whether your statistics work for them or not. The other problem with sticking only to the statistical arguments is that I can trot out any statistic I want, and somebody, again, is always gonna be able to come back with another statistic. Finally, the problem with it is that those statistics are not really why we're against abortion, are they? I mean, the reason why abortion should be illegal is not because thousands of women get injured because of abortions. That's a big reason why, but ultimately it's not the reason why. The main reason why is because there is a real human person with a real dignity and a real right to life who is being killed in an abortion unjustly, right? And so these statistics are helpful, but they're not the fundamental reason why we're pro-life. So what I want to do today is offer you just something else for your tool bag when you are talking about abortion with other people. You don't want to drop the statistics. You still want to take those trainings. They're important. The facts, the statistics, the fetal development, right, the images, all of those have their purpose. And in fact, my husband, when he was in college, when he was 12 years old, visited a fair with his mother at the Alaska State Fair. And there was a pro-life booth, and he went, and they had the pictures of the unborn children that had been aborted. And he saw them, and he said, "What's that?" And his mother was horrified, "Don't look there, you're 12, oh my gosh." But it was too late, he'd already seen it. So she had to explain to him what it was. And he remembers that moment. That was the moment he became convicted. This is wrong. And because of that, he is now a pro-life full-time advocate. And he works in politics and getting people elected to offices who are pro-life and working on pro-life and pro-family and religious freedom ballot issues. And so that would be a good example of how those techniques, those methods are very important to our movement. But we need another language. We need a language that helps build a common ground and pulls people in intellectually, logically, using these things, ethics and justice and principles of life. So we're going to go through all 10 of these principles today. These are what we call 10 universal principles for a healthy culture, or 10 principles of civilization. And they're universal. They apply to anybody, no matter what race you are, no matter what sex you are, no matter how old you are. They apply to every era, whether you lived 10,000 years ago or 20,000 years from now. Okay? And they apply to any location. So whether you live in Africa or India or Mexico or Europe or the United States, right, they apply universally. So these are 10 principles we're going to learn today. Why are principles important? Why are principles important? Where's an idea? Think about that question for a minute. What is a principle? A principle is an underlying or foundational truth, right? An underlying or foundational truth by which we either live our lives or by which we build other principles, like ethical principles or mathematical principles, okay? So a principle is a fundamental, basic truth or rule of life, okay? And then other truths can be built on top of that, okay? Why are principles so important to us as human beings? Who wants to venture a guess? What makes it a principle important?
The foundation that you work on, so you have to have a good foundation to go anywhere.
That's right. You have to have a solid foundation before you can move on to something else, right? And we're going to learn, especially when you see the principles of ethics, if you don't have that solid foundation that's built, it's very easy to fall into unethical behavior. Principles are key because they guide us, they direct us, they give us sort of like the tracks that a train holds on to so that I don't get derailed. These are my principles. These principles are important and these principles are good, and no matter what, I'm not going to violate them. In times that are hard or difficult or emotionally trying, in times that I'm tired or overburdened or afraid, particularly when I am afraid, principles keep me grounded. They're the foundation that keeps me grounded. Okay? What are the biggest reasons why women have abortion? Who knows? What are the biggest reasons?
Socioeconomic reasons.
Socioeconomic reasons, right? I will lose my place in society. We spent a month in India, and in India this is a big deal, right? It's not so much I'm going to lose my job, I'm going to lose my place in society, right? They will be stigmatized if they have a child out of wedlock, if they have a child with a disability, a handicapped child, they'll be stigmatized. And so this fear of, losing my place in society. Economics, right? My fear of becoming poor or having to give up some of what I have or not having what I was hoping to have. What is another reason why women and men seek abortion? Because men seek abortion too, right? In fact, in most cases, we know women claim they have abortions because they were pressured into having an abortion by the man who impregnated her and then abandoned her. Right? Okay, so why do women and men, what's another reason they seek abortion? Yeah.
Not have responsibility over such like a big
Yes.
problem.
Fear of responsibility.
Yeah.
What's another reason that you know of that people have abortion? What's another reason?
Health.
Yeah. Health. Fear of losing my health. That's another reason. Okay, so money, place in society, my health reasons, right? My responsibilities. Yes.
It doesn't necessarily fit into the life that they have envisioned for themselves.
Fear of changing my plans. Do you hear something common? What's the common thread through all of this?
Fear.
Fear, right? Fear is the number one biggest reason why women have abortions. They are afraid of what they are going to lose, what they're going to have to give up, what will happen, what new responsibilities and burdens will be added to them. How do we break down that fear? Can you break down that fear with a statistic? Can you break down that fear with an emotional attack? You're going to make it worse. Can you break down that fear with a gory picture? No. Most of the time, what a woman needs is for somebody to encourage her. And how do you do that? By rebuilding what is missing in her life that causes her to fear the unborn child that God has given to her. So we're going to talk a little bit about happiness. What does happiness mean? We call these the 4 levels of happiness. I saw that on your face, like, oh, wow, so that's how this banner fits in, right? I knew she was going to get to that. Okay, so I kind of tricked you. There are different ways that you can perceive meaning in life, happiness in life, quality of life, love. There are all kinds of different ways you can interpret these. And if you interpret these words in ways that are shallow and narrow, right, that are not really worthy of you, you will be afraid of responsibility, of another person that threatens your plans, right, of the potential for loss of health, right, of the potential for loss of financial status or social status, okay, of the possibility of a child who might bring an extra burden because of a disability, right? We will see those things with fear and with trembling instead of seeing them as an opportunity and a mystery and a possibility for greater gift of myself. Now, I would assume that most people in this group are Christian or faith believers in some way. Most of the people who tend to gravitate towards the pro-life movement have faith of some sort, some type of faith in God or something bigger than themselves. And so what we want to try to do is to help people walk in the door of faith, but from where they're at. Okay? So what we're going to teach today, what we're going to teach you is sort of a pre-evangelizing arm of the pro-life movement. How do we get people to see deeper happiness? And then how do we lead them to the principles that we already kind of intuitively hold? Or maybe you learned this. Some of you might have been homeschooled and you've already learned all these principles, right? Or you went to a school where they taught all these principles. Or you're taking an ethics or philosophy class. Like, I already know these. How do we get people to walk into the door of these principles and move through the deeper levels of happiness so that they'll hear us out and it's not just a shouting match? That's what we're going to do today. So I want to give you a little bit of background about me. This is my husband, Michael, and we were married in 2006 at St. James Cathedral in Seattle. And we love marriage in the pro-life movement. Marriage is important to us. That bond, that commitment, the responsibility for another person, right? The burden that you take on of another person's life becomes actually a freedom and a joy. We love marriage and commitment in the pro-life movement. This is my daughter, Juliet, when she was born. I love this picture. Isn't that great? She got a little fat foot sticking out there. And, this was right after she was born. And she was crying, and I gave her this big fat kiss, and she cried even harder after I did that. She did not like that one bit. But we love babies in the pro-life movement, right? We love life. This is what we want to see, is life coming out of men and women and marriage and families, to see this life coming out. That's a good thing. Okay? And these are my daughters, Juliet and Elizabeth. Some years later, this is my second daughter, Elizabeth, and they love each other, and we love family, right, in the pro-life movement. Family that bonds and is united and is together. We see these as good things and as good values. So this is part of our pro-life movement. It's not just that we want babies. It's that we want family and commitment and unity and love and wholeness and freedom and joy. This is what the pro-life movement is about. It's not just about babies, right? It's about babies for the sake of the goodness that they are, that they contribute to this whole kind of human panoply of love and joy and goodness and faith, and makes the family even bigger. That's who we are as a movement. Now, Father Spitzer, who is the founder of this program, Father Robert Spitzer, is a Jesuit. He lives in California, and he created a program that was first based on this book called Healing the Culture. Has anybody ever read this book? Okay, as part of your last training, you get a copy of the last book. This is the textbook, kind of the basic Bible to this program. And it contains everything in here, almost everything that you're going to learn about today. But a lot of people find this book difficult to read. And the first chapter is on definition theory, which is tough. And so people start with that chapter, and then they're like, oh, God, I can't get through this book. And then they put it down and say, forget it. So now I know that you guys are all like, I'm going to be the first one to read the whole thing. And you're going to try really hard just to prove that I'm wrong. And I know you will get through this book. But what I would encourage you to do if you struggle with chapter 1 is skip it and go to chapter 2, which starts the journey on the 4 levels to happiness. And then go back to chapter 1 after you've read chapter 5. Right? And then read those principles of logic and how you build the definition of a human person and move on. But then Father Spitzer realized he needs to make this a little simpler, so he wrote this book next called 10 Universal Principles. And it's kind of a digest of what he wrote in Healing the Culture, and he added several more principles and organized it in a way that's more logical for people, that was a little more helpful. And he doesn't talk about happiness until the end. So what I recommend you do is read this book first, because you'll just you can go through this book in 2 days. It covers everything we're going to cover today. It's where we took this class from. And then read this book second, which fills out the 4 levels of happiness. And if you really want to go deep in happiness, he wrote some other books on happiness that you can get on our website at healingtheculture.com that go really deep into happiness and these 4 different levels, okay? So there's your 2 course textbooks, Healing the Culture and 10 Universal Principles. The content that I'm going to teach you today, right, the curriculum that I'm teaching you is called Philosophical Foundations. Right? LAST is the name of this college-level training program for students who are already pro-life to learn how to implement and integrate this. But the content I'm teaching you is called Philosophical Foundations because it's the philosophy that grounds our whole movement. So that's what we're doing. And I want to start with this guy. Does anybody know who this is? Kind of says right there, right? Viktor Frankl, very good, Viktor Frankl. Viktor Frankl was a German who lived during the time of the Nazi regime, and he was a psychologist in Germany, and he was sent to the concentration camp in Dachau. And he was stripped of everything, dignity, his wealth, his belongings, his family, his, even his health suffered. And he was put in this concentration camp. And this is after he was liberated. You can see the barbed wire of the camp in the background. And this is him many years later after he had written a book called Man's Search for Meaning. And the book is fascinating. It's another good book I recommend you read for sort of continuing your pro-life studies. Because what he did was he observed people in the camp. In order to sort of keep his senses, his sanity, he did what psychologists do. He observed people. And he watched them, and he discovered that the prisoners in the camp tended to naturally separate into 2 different kinds of people. One group of people are those who tend to define their meaning in life, their purpose, in terms of something tangible, physical, something material, something concrete, like getting their next meal when they were hungry, finding somewhere where they could actually sleep because they were exhausted, avoiding the blows of the guards, or even avoiding the view of the guards so that they wouldn't get into any trouble so they could survive another day. Not being sent to the gas chambers, right? Plumping up their cheeks so they looked red and rosy so they looked healthy. They might even have placed their hope in something longer term, like the Allies will liberate us by Easter, or something like that. Or, well, they didn't have an Easter, okay? The Allies will liberate us by Passover, right? So they would place their trust in something like that, right? But what would happen is when the Allies did not liberate them by Passover, they died. They literally gave up, and they literally died. But there was another kind of people that he observed, and these were the people who tended to define their meaning in life in terms of something intangible, not physical, not concrete, right? Something that was transmaterial. So these were people who, for example, grounded their meaning in generosity. I'm going to give of myself to other people who are in this camp, who are suffering more than I am. Compassion on those who were suffering and dying. Care and concern about other people's problems and fears, right? And wanting to bring them consolation. Forgiveness of the guards who were hurting them so much. And even faith in something transcendental, faith in God. And these people survived. And that's the fascinating point in his book. That there are 2 different kinds of people. And if you ground your identity in something shallow, concrete, finite, material, you will end up eventually living beneath yourself, and it can drive you to such despair that it can even actually literally kill you. But if you ground your meaning in something higher, something transcendent, love, beauty, hope, goodness, justice, compassion, consolation of others, generosity, it actually literally can build not only a whole future of hope and goodness, but it actually leads to a healthy person, physically as well as emotionally and materially. And so the first half of his book is what he observed in the concentration camps. The second half of his book is building a therapy that he called logotherapy, meaning therapy, because he really believed that most of the people who presented themselves to his clinic for psychological counseling didn't have a disease, right? They didn't need a chemical, they didn't need a pill or a drug. They had one little mistaken notion about happiness, about meaning in life, about purpose. And they just needed somebody to help get them on track for what true meaning was. This is why I think most abortions happen. Because people are living for things that are profoundly beneath them. They have very shallow and very narrow definitions of love, suffering, success, quality of life, freedom, goodness, justice. And because of that, a baby comes along when they're trying to pursue what they think is going to make them happy, but it's really not. And they see that baby as a threat, a burden, a responsibility that I'm not ready for yet, right? And even though the vast majority of men and women know this is a real baby, a real human being, we just know that, they're willing to sacrifice that because they don't want to sacrifice their whole notion of happiness. Happiness is where our movement should be starting. But we almost never talk about it. It's almost like we're afraid of it. If I talk about that, I'm going to have to talk about God. And if I talk about God, they're going to think I'm a Bible thumper. So let's just stick to the statistics because that stuff is solid and scientific and facts are good. Gets me out of that trouble. But the problem is it doesn't work. It works for some people. I worked for my husband, right? But for the vast majority of people, they need something more first. They need to see where you're coming from. Remember, if you're a Christian, remember St. Paul, right? Be ready to give a reason for the hope that is in you. Right? Not be ready to give a reason why your statistics are better than the other guys, but be ready to give a reason for the hope that is in you. And your hope is not based on a statistic. It's not based on an image or a picture. Your hope is based on a knowledge and a truth about this, about what will make you happy. So is it okay if we go here first? Can we start with happiness? It's okay. All right, let's go there. Here's Maslow. How many of you have studied Maslow? Okay, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Some of us have. Maslow built this pyramid system where he talked about how if you really want to be happy, you have to fulfill your needs and you have to fulfill them in a particular order. And it kind of makes sense. You first need to breathe and eat food and have some water, right, and sex to continue the human race before you can get to the next level, which would be safety. And you have to have safety around you and some employment and resources and reasonable health before you can get to building friendships and your family and having intimacy in your sexual relationships. And you need that before you get self-esteem, and then ultimately you can now realize your full potential. And there's some truth to Maslow's point. You do have to have some of these lower levels fulfilled before you can usually access the higher levels. The problem was that Maslow never really told us what this is. What does it mean to realize your full potential? And this is where other great thinkers have stepped in to help. Thinkers like St. Thomas Aquinas and Erik Erikson and Kierkegaard and other great thinkers like Father Robert Spitzer, who put it into the colloquial term of happiness, human happiness. So we're going to take you up here through these levels and up here in a system he simplified called the 4 levels of happiness. Okay? Happiness is defined as what? What is happiness? What does it mean to be happy? And everybody should be answering, but we don't, partly because you're on the spot, right? But also partly because, you know what, we never think about it. We never really think about what is happiness anyway? How do you define happiness? So let me give it a shot.
You feel fulfilled in life and you're not content with what you're doing, but you're excited about it as well.
Fulfillment is a very good term for happiness, right? So there's a contentment, there's a fulfillment. So happiness is fulfilling something. What does happiness fulfill? What's being fulfilled when you are happy? Somebody else's dreams? Somebody else's hopes? What's being fulfilled?
Your vocation?
That could be very good. Your vocation is being fulfilled. When I'm eating ice cream, I'm happy. Is my vocation being fulfilled? No, but I'm happy, right? So what's being fulfilled when I sense happiness?
Your desire.
A desire, very good. Happiness is the fulfillment of a desire. Everything you can think of that makes you happy is filling some kind of a desire. But the problem is that there are all different levels of desires. And we don't do a good job in our culture of distinguishing these different levels. And so we equate them as if any desire that is fulfilled is the same as any other desire that's fulfilled. And so you should just go fulfill whatever desires you want and you'll be happy. And the problem is that people aren't. They're miserable. Our statistics on depression and cynicism and despair are higher in this country than they've ever been before. And we have lots and lots of desires fulfilled. We have more money than almost any other nation, except for, of course, the United Arab Emirates, which I just visited, and they've got like gold, everything's built out of gold, it's amazing. But we're a very wealthy nation, right? We have great health care here. Nobody's dying out in the streets. There are hospitals that will take care of people. God bless you. It's a fourth level of happiness. We'll get to that in a minute, okay? We have, people have educational opportunities, entertainment opportunities, and people are filling themselves up with these things. I'm desiring these things and filling themselves up, and they're still fundamentally unhappy. Because there are levels of happiness and they're not all being treated the way they should. They are not all equal. The first level of happiness is called physical pleasure and possessions. Think tangible, think physical, right? Think that first part of Viktor Frankl's book. Anything that will fill up your five senses in a concrete material way, that would be a level 1 happiness. So you get happiness level 1 when you eat ice cream, right? When you work out with the weights and it's really hard and afterwards, you feel really good, right? Or maybe you get a nice back rub, or maybe the warm sun is shining on your body or whatever, okay? So these are the things that fill us up physically, and they're good. There's nothing wrong with happiness level 1. We need level 1. This is the first night after I gave birth to Juliet that she actually slept the entire night through. And there is happiness level 1 on my face. Because I also slept the entire night through, and it was awesome. And my husband saw this and he had to take a picture, and Juliet's kind of looking like, what's the big deal, But here I am with level 1 on my face, and it's good. This is Juliet about 5 years later, and she is having her birthday, and she gets $10 from her aunt. And look at the joy on her face. That is a level 1 happiness, because now I can buy the toy that I've been wanting. She had her heart set on this little toy that was very colorful and smelled good. It had kind of a strawberry smell. And so now she could buy it. And so you see the level 1, and that's good. There's nothing wrong with level 1. God gave you a body, and he wants you to fulfill the desires of the body so you can be healthy. And so that's a good thing. The problem with level 1 is that human beings can live for level 1 as if it were the most important thing. We can choose level 1, and we can do it either consciously or subconsciously. But if we choose level 1 as the most important, we will end up in crisis. We will end up bored because physical things, after a while, aren't fulfilling anymore, and I want something else and something new and something different. I will end up restless because I sort of have this sense that my life has some other meaning than just these things, but I don't know what it is. So I get restless with the things I have, and then I encounter low self-esteem, because I will define the meaning and purpose of my life in terms of the things I'm fulfilling myself with, right? My value is no more than paper money or, a diamond rock. That's how much I'm worth. It's just this stuff. And that low self-esteem will lead us to feeling like we're really living beneath ourselves, because we are. We need more. There's a higher kind of happiness. This is happiness level 2. Happiness level 2 is called ego gratification. It's the kind of happiness that comes from building up my sense of self, right? Not just my senses, seeing, tasting, touching, hearing, smelling, not just my senses, but my sense of myself, right? So I'm not just feeling good, I'm feeling good about myself. That's happiness level 2, and it's called ego gratification. Ego meaning, right, the I, sustaining my sense of self. And the ego gratification is very good. You can experience it in 4 ways. You can experience ego gratification from success or achievement. So you would like to graduate from college, and then you did it. You actually graduate from college, and now you can get a job, and that leaves you with a sense of self-esteem. It will make you happy because you've done it, you did it, now you're out, now you can move on to something else, you don't have to study anymore, you've achieved your diploma, right? And that leaves you with a sense of ego gratification. A second way you can get it is when you start to compare yourself to someone else. I am the first person in my family who graduated from college, right? I mean, I'm not really, I'm just using that as an example, but I am the first person to graduate. So now that leaves me feeling even a little bit happier than just the fact that I achieved something, because I'm better than someone else, right? Or my GPA is higher than your GPA, and that makes me happy, right? Or I have succeeded at a competition, and you're the loser. I'm the winner, you're the loser, I'm happier. There's a third way you can get an ego gratification, and that's through power or control. So if I feel like I have power and authority over you, and you have to do what I say, you're all looking at me, you're listening to what I say, you're writing it down. So what I'm saying is important, right? So I have authority and control over you. That makes me happy. And that's good. And then the fourth way is by popularity. People like me. They love this show, this program, and they go tell other colleges, and more students want it. And then they see me walking down the street, and they're like, "You're the lady who gives those last trainings. You are so cool." And I'm like, okay, yes, I do the last trainings, right? That makes you feel really good. Somebody recognized. This actually happened to me once many years ago when I was out giving a lot more talks on TV and stuff, and people would recognize me in the pro-life movement. And I was in the bathroom, and I had Juliet in her stroller, and I was trying to get the whole stroller into the stall because I was not going to leave her outside of the stall, but I had this huge, wagon trying to get it in, and I was struggling with it. And this woman sees me, and she goes, "I know you." And I'm like, "Really?" And she says, "Yeah, you're that lady who does those pro-life talks on the television station." I was like, "Oh yeah, I am." Just trying to get my kid in here because I really gotta go to the bathroom, And she's like, "I'll watch your baby," and I'm like, "Okay." And so she watched my baby while I got to go to the bathroom, and it was great, And it wasn't just a level 1 happiness because I got to go to the bathroom. I was also feeling a happiness level 2 that, somebody knows who I am, and she's willing to hold my baby for me because I'm famous to this one person who happened to see me on TV one day. So that was really, that was a level 2 sense of popularity. We like to be popular. We like to know that people like us. We like to feel accepted. That's another way of experiencing level 2, and it's very good. There's nothing wrong with happiness level 2 in and of itself. This is the first day after Juliet was born that I figured out how to use the baby carrier without Juliet falling through it on the floor, okay? And you can see that achievement on my face. I did it, okay? That's the level 2 gratification. But it wasn't for my own sake. It was for Juliet's sake. So happiness level 2 can be a very good thing. Here's the key. When level 2 is lived as an end in itself, it is unhealthy. If it is lived as a means to a greater end, it becomes healthy. Anytime you use one of the lower levels of happiness as an end in itself, that's when it becomes unhappy. Notice that about physical pleasure, right? Level 1. If I'm eating and drinking and having sex so that I can feel good and feel fulfilled, and that's the purpose of my life, it's unhealthy because of all those crises we experience. But if I am doing that so that I can now do something with my life, right? Be competitive, achieve something with my life, maybe achieve some popularity or likability, I will keep level 1 in the proper proportion. Right? I won't overeat, I won't be unhealthy, I won't just sit like a vegetable in front of my television because I can't ever do anything. I can't get my degree, I'll never learn anything. Well, the same thing is true with level 2. When level 2 is seen as an end in itself, it becomes very unhealthy. Here's what happens. We call this crisis 2, anger. Have you ever known somebody who is very level 2? Right? All they want is to win or be better than you or to be more popular than anybody else or to have more power over you. And do you ever notice they're kind of angry people? They tend to be very aggressive people because they always have to prove that they're better than you are. There's not like a joy. You don't really see this natural joy in their life. You see somebody who is more angry at others who are keeping them down. They're very quick to anger too. Angry at themselves because they can't achieve what they want to. If they have faith, they may be angry at God because God, you did this to me. Right? You could have made me stronger or more powerful, but you're probably laughing at me now. And they tend to see God in a level 2 way, as if God were a level 2, egotistical guy. And they will interpret their relationship with him in terms of level 2. Jealousy of other people. Have you ever done this? Have you ever, known somebody and they're good at something and you're really jealous of them? And that jealousy kind of creeps into the point where you just look at them like, you're just a jerk. Right? And maybe this is a really nice girl, but because she can do something you can't, you're like, you're just a jerk. You just think you're so cool, right? And it breaks the possibility of having a relationship with this person because now I see this person in terms of what she can do that's better than me instead of seeing her in terms of who she is, right? Seeing her with my heart instead of seeing her with my talents, with my abilities and where they compare. So that jealousy breaks the possibility of relationship. Contempt, maybe I'm better than you are at something. right? And so I look at you, contempt means viewing someone's or holding someone's worth, self-worth, as if they are lower in self-worth than you are. That's contempt. So somebody in level 2 can view others with contempt. Aggression, we talked a little bit about that. Anxiety about how you're going to do tomorrow, right, in the track meet. Or suspicion of other people who are your friends and what they really want. Are you trying to steal my friendships? Are you trying to take away my accomplishments? Are you trying, of people who otherwise, we would have a good relationship with? And then ultimately, resentment of the person. I'll tell you a little story. I remember once that I had a long trip and I had given a speech to this group of people who were far more advanced in philosophy than I was, and it crashed and burned. It was terrible. They asked all these questions. I didn't know what I was talking about. I was totally not prepared. And they wanted to apply it to all these issues I had no context for whatsoever. I'd never studied these other issues. And I kept trying to get myself out of it. And the more I tried to get myself out of it, the deeper hole I built for myself, until at the end I totally humiliated myself. And it was on TV. So I was like, oh, okay. I got on the plane and I went home and I was just so mad. And I got home and there's my husband. And, here's my husband. He's like on this level 3 high, right? Which we'll get to in a minute, love, right? And he sees me getting out of the car and I'm coming in the door and he's like, oh, my wife is home. And he runs out kind of almost dancing to give me this hug, and I'm playing this tape in my head over and over again about the stupid things I said and why didn't I answer it this way? And now it's on TV and people are going to see it when they play it tomorrow and I wish I could stop the whole thing. And he comes up to me and he says, welcome home, honey. I said, oh, shut up. Okay. Wow. And he's like, did you have a nice trip? I was like, no, I didn't, right? I was holding him in resentment because he's so happy and I'm not. In the split-second decision where I decided you're just jumping out of here because you had a nice day and I didn't, and now you're just going to throw it on me, and why don't you just go back inside in your little hole and leave me alone? Can't you see I'm suffering, right? So now I've got contempt for him and I've been aggressive towards him and I'm jealous at him because he's happy and I'm not. And that makes me angry, and I have all this anxiety about what's going to happen, and now I'm suspicious that he's just saying these things because he's just trying to be mean, and I resent my whole life. I got all of this crisis going on in just one split-second decision, right? That event was more important than the love my husband was trying to offer me at the moment. And we do this, don't we? We do this all the time. It's amazing how we do that. So how do we get out of this? One little change in attitude, like Viktor Frankl said, can make all the difference in the world. Happiness level 3, the good beyond the self. This is the kind of happiness that comes from deciding to make a difference to someone or something other than yourself for the sake of that other person, not just for my own sake, not so I could appear to be really great because I did something nice for you, right? But because you are important in and of yourself, I want you to learn this content. I don't care if you don't remember who I am. I don't even care if you didn't really like me because I was spitting on the people in the front row, or I kind of smelled a little bad or whatever, or I wasn't the greatest speaker, I talked too fast or whatever. I don't even care if you like me as a speaker. I want you to learn this content. And I'm going to do the best I can at giving it to you and helping you learn it and integrate it and practice with it. Why? Because it'll make you happier. I know it because it made me happier. And I see you as this little good eternity of love. And I see that you have the potential to bring justice and beauty and goodness and fairness and love and truth into the world. And I want you to do that to your best abilities because you will be happier and you will be more inspired and you will live a healthier life and you will follow God's calling if you do that. And not only that, but you will affect the culture. You could change the world. You can change your family and your friends and make a difference to them. You may save an unborn child, and that's good in and of itself. And it doesn't matter if you never remember me. That's level 3. Okay? So that's wanting to use level 2 for a good beyond itself. That's level 3. The desire to make a difference to someone beyond themselves. Now, can you be doing a level 3 action with a level 2 attitude? Yes, right? Think of a Boy Scout walking a little old lady across the street because he wants to get the badge. Right? So he's going to get the little old lady across the street badge. And so he goes out and he finds a little old lady, right? And there are no little old ladies. It's like, I've been out every week, every day for a week, trying to find a little old lady to walk across the street so I can get my badge. He's like, where's the little old lady? And finally, on the 7th day, he sees one, right? Oh, there's a little old lady. Okay, gotta get her. Come on. Okay, quick, gotta get you. Oh, you fell. Come on, get up. Okay, come on, hurry up. Okay, your attitude is everything, right? So this guy is walking the old lady across the street in order to get the badge. Okay, so you can be doing a level 3 thing with a level 2 attitude, and it's really level 2. It's not level 3. Or the boy can say, you know, I gotta walk the little old lady across the street. I gotta find her. Where is she? I haven't had one. There she is. And he starts walking to her, and then some adult guy, 22 years old, falls in front of him, right? What's he gonna do? I want my badge. There goes the little old lady, right? But he would say, oh, I gotta help this guy. And he would lean over and help this guy and let the little old lady go, and now I gotta stay out here another week. Because what he's thinking of is doing the good for the sake of the good, not for the sake of my5 That motivation is level 3, okay? So you can choose to do a good beyond yourself for the sake of another. And there are actually 5 different ways that you can do that. We call these the 5 transcendentals. This goes all the way back to Plato and Aristotle. We talked about there are 5 different ways that human beings seek that good beyond themselves. Truth, love, justice, beauty, and home. Every human being wants those things. We want truth. Human beings want truth. And we don't just want some truth. We want absolute truth, right? We want all the answers to all the questions. Okay? So human beings seek and desire truth. There's a picture of my doctor, who, when Juliet was born, gave her care without charging us for the first month of her life, because she knew that my husband and I were both pro-life activists, and that was our ministry, and our salary was not very big, and we didn't have health insurance, and so she gave her care without charging us for a whole month. Love, right? Doing a good beyond yourself for the sake of someone else. That's a good example of love. Okay? Truth, love, goodness, or justice. Right? Human beings wanting justice in the world. Here's a good picture here of, right? There's a young man going in, this desire for justice in the world, and rescuing this young boy during wartime, doing a good beyond himself for the sake of justice. Human beings desire truth, love, justice, beauty. We want beauty in the world. We want to bring beauty in the world. I'm not talking about the kind of beauty where you're frustrated with yourself because you're not beautiful enough and so you won't attract the man, right? I'm talking about our desire for something a little bit more profound than that. Beautiful music and architecture and art, right? And beauty in nature, things that inspire us to something greater than ourselves. All human beings desire beauty. And then we desire home, right? Aristotle called this the one. Which also has been interpreted as being, right? Being, that all human beings desire being or oneness or unity. And we call it home, which means we all desire to feel like we are at home with the universe, that we are accepted and not alienated, that we are a part of the community, the whole human community. And so we desire these things. But here's the problem with level 3. As good as it is, human beings desire it perfectly, right? We want absolute truth, unconditional love, perfect justice, flawless beauty, and eternal home. We want these 5 transcendentals perfectly, absolutely, unconditionally, infinitely, flawlessly. We're natural ultimatizers, we do. And you can think of it in your own life, the times that you wanted, maybe in a beloved, maybe your mother or a boyfriend or girlfriend, that you wanted their love and you weren't getting it perfectly the way you wanted it because they didn't understand you perfectly. And you were probably disappointed, frustrated with their inability to really understand you. I remember a time with my daughter Juliet when she wanted me to help her with her artwork, and she had been drawing. She's an artist, and she'd been drawing something, and it was, in her mind, it was a mess. It was not it wasn't being represented perfectly on the canvas, on the piece of paper. And so she was crying, and I came over and I said, well, why don't you try this over here? No, I can't do that over there because that's where the bear's gonna go. Okay, well then why don't you put this over here? Oh no, that's not right, because over here the flowers are supposed to be here, and I don't want to mess up the flowers. And then she cried. And the tear got on the paper. And now she's got a wet spot on her paper. What am I gonna do now? I said, well, why don't you draw a flower around the tear? It'll be perfect. Here, look, I'll show you. So I start drawing it. What are you doing? And then she's crying even harder. I'm trying to make it perfect. And she was so unhappy because I couldn't figure out how to solve her problem. I didn't know what she wanted. I didn't know how to fix it. And everything I did was making it worse. And I was not able to console her. What was going on there? My daughter had an image of perfect beauty in her head, and she was trying to represent it on the paper. And she couldn't get it. And I couldn't get it out of her. I couldn't be that perfect beauty for her. And so I ended up ruining it. So she got really disappointed and despairing, right? In that moment, we desire these things perfect. Here's another example. I'll tell you this story. Our desire for absolute truth. Every one of us wants all the right answers to all the questions. We're not satisfied with just some truth. Years ago, before I was married, I lived in this apartment above a family's home, and I would often make cookies. And their little daughter, her name is Tori, would come upstairs and make cookies with me. Well, one day she came up and I was making bread, and she'd never seen that before. Right? You buy bread from the store. You don't make bread. That's weird. So she wanted to help. I said, sure. She was about 4 years old, and she saw this bowl of water with yeast in it, warm water with some yeast in it. She said, what's that? I said, well, that's warm water. It has yeast in it. And she said, what's yeast? And I said, well, it's this stuff, and when you put it in the warm water, it comes alive, and it kind of makes your bread grow. You know how the bread has to kind of grow and poof out. How does it do that? And I said, oh, well, because inside of the yeast are these molecules, and they're kind of sleeping, but when they get wet with the warm, they come alive, right? But why does it grow? Well, because the molecules are made up of these things called atoms, and when the atoms get warm and then you put it in the oven, they get hot, the atoms bounce off of each other and they spread the bread out, right? She's 4, so I'm like trying to just do it with a 4-year-old brain. And she goes, but what are atoms? Okay, so atoms are these things that are made up of electrons and protons. And they're really small, and you can't see them. You have to use a microscope. What's an atom? She says, what's an electron? I said, okay, so an electron is made up of quarks, which are these subatomic particles, and they exist in these kind of electromagnetic fields. And when you have a quark with motion, it doesn't have position, but when it has position, it doesn't have momentum, and you can shoot them through these photon shooters. And there's this thing called the Bell inequality theorem. And I don't know what I'm talking about. I can't remember any of this. And she's sitting there just looking at me like, and she finally says, you don't know, do you? And I'm like, oh, man, dang, I was trying to be all smart. I said, no, I don't. Go ask your mother. And Tori went away disappointed because she knew there was an answer to all these questions, and I didn't have it. And she went away. How did Tori know to ask a question? How did she know to keep asking questions when she doesn't have access to the answer? Dogs don't do that, right? Dogs don't ask those questions. A dog sits under the tree, and the apple falls on his head, and he eats it, and then he falls asleep. But Newton gets hit on the head with the apple, and he looks at it, and he says, why did it fall instead of go up? Right? And then he comes up with this theory of gravity. Human beings ask questions. We want to know the answer. How do we do that? Unless we somehow had some kind of awareness of the beyondness of my question, that there is an answer to my question, right? Unless I had some kind of access to that otherness that's out there, I would never think to ask a question, which means that I must have some aspect of my nature that is not just the immediate, concrete, physical reality of what I am in my body right now. I have some kind of a transmaterial awareness of the beyondness of my question that is eliciting the question from me, right? I have a soul. You can actually prove the existence of the soul using philosophy because of our access to the beyondness, our awareness of its existence. Here's another example. If you don't like this example, think about love, our desire for unconditional love. Everybody desires unconditional love. We all want it, right? And we all desire it. And if you can't see it in yourself yet, take a look at little children. You can see the desire for unconditional love in little children. This is Susanna, my niece, when she was about 4 years old. And she loved to dress up like a princess. So she'd get all these tutus on, put her hair up. And one day I was visiting her. They live in Phoenix. And I was watching her play in the bedroom. She didn't know I was watching. I was in the living room, watching through the doorway. And she has this feather boa on and these little Cinderella plastic high heels, and a very 4-year-old attempt at makeup on her face, right? And she's sitting there stroking the feather boa, and she's saying out loud, I'm the princess, and you're the prince, and you have to marry me. Right? And I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting. And that's when I noticed, sitting in the other corner of the room was Aaron, my nephew. And he was clutching a fire engine to his chest. And he says, I don't want to marry you. And she says, you don't have a choice. I'm the princess, and you're the prince, and you have to marry me. And he says, I don't like marrying you. Because that tells me they've played this game before, right? And he knows when you marry Susanna, you get bossed around a lot. And he doesn't want that to happen. He says, I don't want to marry you. And she says, well, don't you know if you don't marry me, you can't ever grow up? And I'm like, wow, that's profound. That's really deep coming from a 4-year-old. There's some truth in that. Okay. And he says, Well, he wants to be just as profound and deep. So he says, I can't marry you right now because I got to figure out how this truck works first. I'm like, whoa, good one, right? So she gets off the bed and she walks up to him and she puts her little fists on her hips and she says, oh, for heaven's sakes, give me that truck. I'll show you how it works. And she leans over to grab it from him and he puts up the truck to stop her and she bonks her head right on the corner and gets a big old red welt and she runs off screaming and he starts crying and I'm thinking this marriage is not going to be very good. This is not going to last long. I can see it in the papers, right? Princess leaves. Okay. What was the problem? What was the problem with this relational little violation? What happened here? And what was the solution? Was the right thing to do this? Should I have gone to Susanna and said, Susanna, you are desiring unconditional, perfect love. And you are desiring it from a human being who will never be unconditional and never be perfect. And you can never find that anywhere. It doesn't exist. So the best thing you can do is get rid of the desire. Just stop desiring it. Be satisfied with the imperfection of the world. Crush those feelings. Abandon them. Go eat some chocolate, right? Go do something else and forget about it because it's not going to happen. And the sooner you face reality, the happier you'll be. So get over it. I think I would have really created a sociopathic person, if I had done something like that. But instead, I did this. I said, Susanna, you want it to be loved unconditionally. That means totally and wholly and fully for who you are, because you are a princess. You really are. Because your Father in heaven is a real king, and you're his daughter. And that means you really are a princess. And you deserve to be loved unconditionally. But you placed your desire for unconditional love in a conditioned source. Right? You tried to extract perfect love from someone who is imperfect and human. Just redirect that desire to God. God sees your princessness. He knows your heart. He loves you perfectly. He's the one you're desiring. Let Aaron be a little boy and love him for who he is, and let God love you perfectly. She got the point. She was 4 years old. Right? She didn't go running off dancing and skipping at that moment. She still needed to have her cry, but she got the point, right? And she grew up with faith. So one little identity crisis, one little mistake about meaning in life. Look at justice, the desire for perfect justice. Oh my gosh. Who here does not desire perfect justice and fairness? Anybody? Right? Right? We all want perfect justice, and when we don't see it, we feel outraged. We feel indignant about imperfect justice. When you read these stories about these people who went to prison for a crime, lived there for 20 years, and then DNA testing discovers they really didn't do it. And then some other guy says, oh, it was me, and he's in jail, for 50 years anyway, so he admits it. We're like, what? This guy was in prison for 20 years for something he never did. And so he comes out, and we put him on TV, and, he sues, and he gets, $10 million. But no amount of money makes it better. He lost 20 years of his life. And they'll tell you that. I can never get back the 20 years I lost. There is no way that you human beings can give me perfect justice for what happened to me. And if you don't see it in the big world outside of it, look, little children. These are my daughters, Juliet and Elizabeth. And this is the day their Uncle Michael gave them this little pony as a gift. And so Juliet jumps on it because she's the biggest. She got there first. And she straps the strap around her and says, it's mine. Right? Because she saw it first, and she's got the strap around her, and Elizabeth hops on the back, and Juliet's kicking her, saying, get off, it's mine. And Elizabeth senses the injustice. It's both of ours. No, it's not. I saw it first. It's mine. Get off. You can have your turn later. Ooh, not fair. Elizabeth's saying, that's not fair. Did I have to teach Elizabeth to say that? Did I have to teach her what justice was? Did I have to sit down and show her justice versus injustice, and here's how you react when something unfair happens? Nuh-uh. She figured this out all by herself. That's not fair, right? And do you see what she's doing? In an attempt to right the wrong that has been done to her, she's taking her hand down. She's going to grab onto this stirrup, and she's going to pull it over as she jumps off. But Juliet is strapped to the horse, and she can't get off. This horse, seconds after this picture was taken, goes flipping over with Elizabeth running off of it. Juliet gets thrown onto the floor, and this metal stirrup goes up and hits her in the head. Ow, right? So Juliet's crying, and Elizabeth, I wish I had a picture after, because of course I'm running to Juliet to try to console her and scolding Elizabeth. Elizabeth has this look on her face like, justice, right? Oh, human beings desire perfect justice, beauty, flawless beauty, right? Every little girl knows how to do that when you take her picture. Don't we? We just do, we know we're pretty. And there's Juliet, already figured that out. And Elizabeth is too young. She's like, I want a cookie, you know. but there's Juliet looking right at me. Smile, and she does that. I didn't tell her to cock her head. We all want perfect beauty. We all want to imitate perfect beauty, right? Men who paint their art and architecture, men and women, right? We want perfect beauty. Even a man in his body wants that perfect beauty, right? That perfect physique. We want that. And home. Unconditional, perfect, eternal home. We all want the perfect home where family is together and everyone feels one with the family. Everyone is united. Everyone feels harmony. Nobody feels alienated, right? We all want to be together. This is my family. When I was growing up, there's my mom and dad. And it was a beautiful family, right? But it wasn't eternal. My mom and dad passed away. My siblings all moved away. I hardly ever see them. Right? But we want this perfect eternal home, but we can't get it from this world. Even when this picture is taken, can you tell which one is me? My mother is trying to get me in the picture, in the family, and I'm already thinking beyond the family. I want to go there, right? Already moving beyond the family. Now I want my own family, and I build my own family, right? And already Juliet's starting to talk about what she wants to do when she grows up. I'm like, not yet, you know, not yet. But we build these families, and they can seem really perfect, but they don't last. Right? They're not eternal, not in this world anyway. Not only that, but there's often misunderstandings. You go home for Thanksgiving break and you're having this great turkey dinner and your mom is happy and you feel so at home, and then somebody has to bring up the exams, right? You're like, did you have to bring that up? I know I got a D, but can we get over the D already? We've talked about this 8 times, and then all of a sudden your mother says, well, you never want to hear what I have to say. You just never want to hear it. I always have to hear what you say, and I love what you say, Mom, but you're not listening to me right now. Mom, I listen to you all the time, but why don't you ever listen to me? Oh, now it's about you. No, it's not about me. Well, why is it always about, and pretty soon you've got this fight with your mom over the turkey dinner when you were just having a nice dinner, right? Like, where did this come from, right? We want perfect, absolute, infinite home. So here's the key, and then we'll take a little break. The key is human beings want perfect level 3, but we can't get it out of this world, and we will end up disappointed, frustrated with dashed expectations if we try to extract perfection out of an imperfect world. And we will end up cynical if we stay there. Okay? So often what happens is people will move back to level 1 or level 2. Forget about the goodness of this world. It's all about me. I'm just going to get mine. Or I'm just going to go shopping. You know, I'm just going to eat some chocolate. Right? I'll just go swimming, forget about this, right? We become cynical. Unless we recognize the good we can do in this world is finite. Sometimes it has to crash and burn because there is something bigger than me that I am desiring, and that's God. That's level 4. Happiness level 4 is placing the desire for unconditional truth, love, goodness, beauty, and home in an unconditioned source. So how would you define God? God is perfect truth. Unconditional love, right? Flawless beauty, eternal home, absolute justice. That's what God is. He's the fulfillment of my desire for all of these realities, and I can let God be God and let humans be humans. Now, we could spend a whole class, we could spend an entire semester just kind of exploring happiness level 4, but we don't have time for that. So we're not going to do that today. We're going to take a break. But what I want you to see at this portion right now is this. Our culture is very stuck in level 1 and 2. And it is changing our definition of love, success, quality of life, freedom, suffering, right and wrong. It's all coming out of here culturally. Now, there's still a lot of level 3 and 4 in our culture, and you see that sometimes in movies, and you'll see that sometimes in commercials, even from, recognizable fast food joints or products that we buy over the counter all the time, right? We'll see some level 3 advertisements where the family's coming together, and it'll make you cry. Oh, that was such a beautiful commercial. So you'll see level 3 and 4, right? There are churches everywhere. We're far more Christian culture in many ways than other nations, certainly more so than Europe still, more than Canada still. There's a lot of level 3 and level 4 still in our culture. But overall, our culture has bought hook, line, and sinker level 1 and 2 as ultimate meaning in life. And predominantly in music, in fashion, in the commercial industry, in movies, in film, in television, right, in literature, you're going to see this predominantly. And you're going to see predominantly young people thinking that this is what meaning and purpose in life is. And it is profoundly affecting how we view all the terms that are important to us in the pro-life movement. In the last section, we talked about those 4 levels of happiness and got some idea of the culture, what I want is some feedback from you now. Where do you see happiness level 1 and level 2 unhealthy in our culture? I want you to turn to your partner, pair off in twos, turn to your partner and talk about where do you see unhealthy level 1 and level 2 in our culture. Go. Okay, I'm gonna stop you here now and I wanna get your ideas. Raise your hand if you had an idea in your group, if something came out of your discussion. Raise your hand. Did everybody think of something? Most people? Okay, what was your idea here?
We said the club and like makeup ads.
Makeup ads. Yes, okay. Right here, what'd you come up with?
We were just thinking about like how we live in school, like grades, GPA. Like
Grades in school matter a lot, sometimes overwhelming and dominating your life. What'd you come up with?
Like fancy food, eating out.
Eating out, fancy food, right? We can really indulge. I had an event last week and we spent, for 7 people, we spent $650 on food to feed 7 people. It was insane, right? There was wine, you had your cake, you had your pre-course meal, and then you had your salad, and then, you know, there were 5 different things to choose from. It's insane. You know, our level 1 can really sometimes go nuts. Yeah, and everyone went home sick and full, and then they're giving us doggy bags. We're like, no more food, okay? What'd you come up with here?
Almost all advertisements.
Almost all advertisements, very unhealthy in promoting that level 1 and that level 2 to sell their product, right? So that you notice when an ad comes out and it's like anti-bullying or some family love, or the grandfather comes and the son takes him into his house, right? Did you see the ad recently with the hearing aid where the father can't hear the son? They're working in the workshop and the son is like in his 20s or 30s and he says, I love you, Dad. And the dad says, what? And he says, I love you, Dad. What? I can't hear. So it's all about this hearing aids, to sell hearing aids. And then the last scene, he gets the new hearing aid where he can hear things, and his son, they're out working in the shop again. And the son says, I love you, Dad. And the father goes, what? And the son goes, I love you, Dad. And the dad goes, I heard you the first time. I just wanted to hear it again. You know, and you're like, oh, it was so beautiful, right? This level 3 family relationship where the son is with the older father and they're working together. He's not off in a nursing home and the son has abandoned him in the nursing home. They're working together and they love each other and he's expressing his love, and then he kind of plays with the son, but I just wanted to hear you say it again, right? That was just so beautiful. So every now and then you see that level 3 and 4, it's still a part of our culture, but it's not a dominant part of our culture. And it's really affecting in very negative ways how we view the words that are most important to us in the pro-life movement. And the pro-abortion movement capitalizes on happiness level 1 and 2, right? And you may have seen the movie Unplanned, and you can see in that movie, the movie about Abby Johnson, who came out of the abortion industry, out of Planned Parenthood, to become a great pro-life advocate and now has 10 children, you know, and she's left the abortion industry. You can see in that movement how they play off of level 1 and 2 desires of these women who come into the clinics. You know, you won't be able to get your job. You won't be able to, have you thought about this? Have you considered about that? You need the abortion today. Next week, it's going to cost another $100. You know, and they really play on those kinds of fears. We can take care of that problem for you, and you could go back out and, you know, have a great job and a great life, instead of really looking for what the fears of these women are. So I want to take you through some of these terms. We call these the terms of cultural definitions. These are cultural definitions and personal definitions. And then we're going to start with these: success, quality of life, love, and suffering. And then after the next break, we'll go through freedom, personhood, rights, and the common good. So let's just deal with these first 4 right here. How does our culture view success? There are 4 different ways you can view success, and it all depends on what you mean by happiness. I want you to see why this discussion on happiness is so important. If you're living in level 1, you're going to view success as having physical advantage for myself. When I have the physical advantages that I want for myself, I am having a successful life. But if I am deprived, if I am suffering loss, if I am in pain, I am not successful. Okay? So I need these physical things to be fulfilling in my life, or I will view my life as a failure. So it won't just affect me in my body, it'll actually affect me psychologically and emotionally as I view my life as a failure, because I don't have the things that I think I need to have in order to be happy. Look at the person stuck in level 2. Success is the ego advantage. Whenever I have an advantage of my ego, my sense of self above you, above something else, then I feel successful. But when I have lost a competition, I am not as popular as someone else, I didn't achieve my graduation, I didn't graduate, I can actually see my life as a failure. Not just my educational pursuit as a failure. I will perceive myself as a failure in level 2 because I have lost in these level 2 desires. But take a look at what level 3 and 4 does. Look at how level 3 and 4 heal that problem. Okay? In level 3, I view success as the transcendent or the transcendental advantage. Right? I am successful to the extent that I am giving away myself for the good of others. Even if I fail in my college education, okay, maybe college wasn't for me. Maybe I'll do something else that doesn't require a college degree, but I just want to make my life matter to someone else. Or maybe I'll get married and have children and my life matters in that realm. I never went to college. I never got a degree. I never had a career. I never went off and cured cancer. I never did all this stuff. But I have my family, and my family knows how to love. And I imparted wisdom to that family. And they know love and goodness. And they went out into the world to have families and be good. And now I have these good little grandchildren. And I can sense that my life is successful because I was in it. Not because of what I did or some success or achievement or some power I had over somebody else or this moment when I won and here's the trophy to prove it. But my life mattered because I was here, just because I existed. And I imparted love and wisdom and goodness to other people. Okay? So here, this serves as kind of a corrective of the sense that our lives lose meaning and that we are failures because of what we failed to have or what we failed to achieve. Okay? And look at the ultimate advantage in level 4. I view my life as successful to the extent that I have given up everything to God and trusted Him with it all. Doesn't matter if I was a failure in my family. I mean, it does matter. Okay, I'm not trying to be trivial about that. But even if I have been a failure in my family, and as hard as I tried, as much as I did, right, I wasn't as loving as I could have been. I wasn't always present to my children. You know, I made a lot of mistakes. I was not a good example here. I let them watch way too much television and listen to music I knew they shouldn't have. And I tried to be their friend when they needed a mother. And I'm a failure in the relationships and in my family. Even that, I can know my life is successful if I can give it to God and say, God, you are the authority. You are in control. I am powerless now. You take care of it. I can't help my children anymore. They're all grown up. They're all making the same mistakes I did. I can't fix it. You can fix it. And the more I can let go and give it to Him, the more successful I know that I have been. So I can still die knowing that my life is a success because I've left it in His hands. And ultimately, they all have free will anyway. And even if I'd done everything right, they still could have fallen away, right? And I leave it to Him and I trust in Him now. Right? And I accept His forgiveness. And in accepting His forgiveness and His mercy on me for my failures, and in praying for the ones that I have harmed and the bad that I have done to them and the abandonment I have been to them, I can have success in that because I trust in God. I know He can bring what they need, just like He brought it to me now in my failures. Right? So that level 4 corrects the problem we can have from the level 3 perspective in our desire for success. Everyone wants to be successful. We do. It's just natural to us to want to be successful. But what do you mean by success? And here's a critical point. A lot of times people will tell us, they'll come to us and say, you know, well, you're trying to, with your booth here, maybe you have a booth with your exhibit out on the red square, is that what you call it? Mm-hmm. Right? And you've got your pictures and all this, and people come up to you and they say, you just want to abandon women to be, you know, objects for men, and, you know, they can't live their lives and they can't get their careers, and you just want them to, you know, be complete failures. And we look at them and we say, well, wait a minute, look at the pictures and look at the statistics. And instead what we should be saying is, well, wait a minute, I want women to be successful too. But what do you mean by success? I mean, I'd like to hear from you, what do you think success is? What does that mean to you? And then more often than not, we find, even on secular college campuses, people who are authentic in coming to you and not just want to spit at you, you know, you can't really do anything about that, but people who are authentic in wanting to find out about you, they'll tell you, success is this. And usually it's, you know, having a career, making a difference, doing something with your life. You know, I want to be a doctor. Women want to be lawyers. Women have so much to give. And I'll say, okay, I think that's part of success, but can I tell you what I think success means? I think that, and usually they're not going to say no. They're going to listen. I think success means giving ourselves away for the good of others and trusting in something bigger than ourselves. And when you do that, you know your life can't be a failure. But if success comes from giving ourselves away for the good of someone else, how do we find that when we're killing somebody in order to get ahead? Isn't that kind of the opposite of success? How are we teaching women that they can be successful when all we focus on is success defined as money, power, career, right, fame, those things, instead of success is gift of self, love, compassion, right? Desire for helping other people, right? Embracing the human family. Isn't that a better definition of being successful? Do we really want a world where everyone is defining success as power, control, money, career, independence? Because that looks a lot like cultures in the past that weren't really very healthy, right? So now you can engage in a dialogue on a much deeper way. I gave a talk in a high school once to a bunch of kids who were in a secular public school on the 4 levels of happiness. And afterwards, I built this case for pro-life. And at the end of it, I asked questions, and one of the girls raised her hand and she says, I can understand how on happiness level 3 and level 4, I really, abortion would not be a good thing, and I'm against abortion because, you want to give your life to other people. But I just think abortion should be legal in the case of disabilities, when a child has a profound handicap, because that child can never be successful at life. And so you're just kind of abandoning this child to a life of failure. And why would you do that? Shouldn't abortion be legal in that case? Sitting in the back of the class was a girl with spina bifida in a wheelchair. Right there in her own class, right? And when she heard this statement, that girl raised her hand. And I called on her, and it took her a while to get the words out, but she said, it all depends on what you mean by success. And of course, the first girl who had asked the question turns and she says, oh, Annika, I didn't mean you. And Annika says, well, what did you mean? And it was this great dialogue between them. And Annika revealed, the girl in the wheelchair, revealed that her definition of success is that when I'm here and we're friends, and I thought you were my friend, but maybe you're not my friend. And the other girl was like, no, I am your friend. No, I really am. And so it was I was just watching this thing happen. And they came to this realization that the real success in this first girl's life was her ability to reach out, to make amends for what she had done, and to reestablish this friendship that she had just broken when she insinuated that Anna could never be successful and should have been aborted, right? And it was just beautiful. The rest of the class just watching this like, whoa. Glad I didn't say anything. And it was so profound and beautiful. Success, okay? Quality of life. How do we view quality of life? Big reason why people have abortions and support abortion. How can you condemn a woman to a low quality of life? She will be poor, right? She will be unmarried. She won't have the things she needs. She won't be able to experience certain things. Her child may be disabled, profoundly disabled, maybe in pain. The woman's health may suffer. All of these deal with the desire for quality of life. And usually when they bring these up, I ask them, it sounds like you want women to have a high quality of life, and children too. And I think that's great. I do too. Can we at least both agree that both of us desire high quality of life, and that's why we are taking the positions that we want. But I would ask you, what do you think brings us true quality of life? Is it really just being free of dependence on someone, being free of pain, being free of disabilities, and having all the stuff you want to have and enjoy all the time? Does that really give you quality of life? Because when I go to the shopping marts and I'm in the aisle checking out, there's all these magazines of all these people who have all the things that supposedly lead to a high quality of life. Independence, money, fame, power, talents, incredibly talented people, and they can enjoy anything they want, and they're dressed really beautifully, and they live in these big houses, and they're carrying champagne, but they look really miserable. All the headlines aren't, this person is so happy living this wonderful quality of life. It's usually divorce, scandal, drugs, alcohol, tried to commit suicide, anorexic. Don't you think that maybe quality of life is defined by something more than just all these things that drive women to abortion? Things like quality of life comes from my ability to be in a family and build a community and impart love and goodness, right? So the idea that I want to try to share with you is that we change the dialogue. Instead of things like, but the handicapped child is still a human person, and still, it's murder, and still it's killing somebody. And look at the statistics of all the handicapped people who have gone on to, live successful lives. And Beethoven, look at all the music that he did. All we're doing is building a level 2 argument, aren't we? If you give them a chance, disabled people can be just as level 2 as you can. Why would we do that? Right? That's not why we believe their lives have value anyway. is because don't they have a goodness in and of themselves just like you have goodness in and of yourself? Do you really want to say that what gives you quality of life is how many musical compositions you've created or how much money you've got? We're going to exercise with some of this and practicum with some of this at the end so you can see how when you're in dialogue, you can kind of just a little twist of the way people are thinking and how much it changes them. Take a look at how we define love. There are 4 different ways to define love, right? So love can be defined as physical attraction and gratification. Sometimes people will say, every child a wanted child, right? And of course, the conclusion is if the child's not wanted, you should kill it, okay? But we need to go a little deeper than that. What do you mean by wanted? When you say the child should be wanted, what do you mean? Do you mean that I should want the child? Because if the emphasis is on the I, every child should be wanted by me or by the mother. We should want the child or the child isn't worth anything. That sounds like more of a selfish relationship between you and the child. But what if instead wantedness means that the child has something in and of himself that is desirable? That every human being has something in himself that is desirable. You do. Your goodness is not just because your mom wanted you, right? And you sometimes see these pictures of these pro-choice kids, their parents give them these signs that say, I am a choice, as if that's what made me valuable, that my mom wanted me, and it's her wantedness that gave me value. Really, do you really want to believe that your mother wanting you is what gave you value? Because I'll guarantee you there are times your mom doesn't really want you anymore. I look at my kids sometimes like they have 3 heads. I'm like, where did you come from? Okay, it's not your desirability in the eyes of your mother that gives you the value that you have. It is because you, in and of yourself, even when you are undesirable to others, have a unique goodness. And that unique goodness of yours is desirable in itself, which means everybody is wanted. Because everybody has a unique goodness and a unique dignity and something intrinsically good about them. Right? You just need to discover what it is. Right? But everyone has the capacity for goodness and love and justice and beauty and home. We all have this capacity, and that in itself is desirable. Right? And so the real question is not, should every child be wanted by me? But what's wrong with me when I'm not wanting someone? What am I not seeing? What am I missing in that desirability of the other that I'm not looking for because I'm seeing something through the eyes of level 1 or level 2? You're irritating me. You're bothering me. You're stealing from my desires, right? What am I missing? And I'm not looking through eyes of level 3 and 4. Where's the goodness in you? Where's the future potential in you? Where's the possibility for goodness and love in you? And then desiring that because it is desirable in and of itself. Interesting. 4 different levels of love. I'll just let you take a look at that on your sheet. Okay, we're going to stop here for a moment, and I want to move now to just showing you a little video. This video takes all of those terms, love, success, quality of life, right, and the 4 levels of happiness, and builds just a little bit of a questioning argument for secular culture about what really matters on the question of abortion. This is an animation that we created, and it's something you can use when you're talking to people. It's about 5 minutes long, and it kind of takes people through. And we created it for our last students so that when you are dialoguing with others, you can show them this little video and start a dialogue with it. So we're going to take just a little minute to do this. Is the embryo a human being? Or is it something more primitive that has the potential to become a human being sometime in the future? This has to be the single most important question that demands an answer in the abortion debate. Even Supreme Court Justice Harry Blackmun, who wrote the 1973 Roe v. Wade decision legalizing abortion in the United States, acknowledged this when he said, if this suggestion of personhood is established, the appellant's case, of course, collapses. For the fetus's right to life would then be guaranteed specifically by the amendment, meaning, of course, the 14th Amendment. Unfortunately, Blackmun famously sidestepped the entire issue when he said, we need not resolve the difficult question of when life begins. When those trained in the respective disciplines of medicine, philosophy, and theology are unable to arrive at any consensus, the judiciary, at this point in the development of man's knowledge, is not in a position to speculate as to the answer. In other words, he was saying important people don't seem to be able to agree. and we're just judges. So we don't really need to answer the question about whether the unborn are full human beings with moral worth, deserving of legal protection. We'll just make abortion legal. And if anybody ever finds out in the future that there really is a human being in there, well, then they'll have to overturn our flawed decision. Not only was this an appallingly dangerous legal precedent, it completely ignored compelling philosophical and biological evidence that human life does indeed begin at sperm-egg fusion, otherwise known as conception or fertilization. Let's break this down. There's an important principle in logic that helps to objectively establish what is real and what is not real in the world. It's about 2,400 years old and is sometimes called the principle of objective evidence, or the principle of publicly verifiable evidence. It holds that if a theory or an explanation or a definition is to be considered valid, it ought to have evidence that other people of reasonable intelligence can verify. Sounds rational, right? I mean, if I were to just arbitrarily assert something without giving any publicly verifiable evidence, you would be logically free to arbitrarily deny it. For example, if I said, it's a baby, and you asked, well, how do you know? And I said, I just feel it deep in my heart. Well, the depths of my heart are not really publicly verifiable. And even if they were, my personal feelings are subjective and have nothing to do with the reality of what's being observed. But there is objective, publicly verifiable evidence that we can make use of in the abortion debate. You may have heard of the famous French geneticist by the name of Dr. Jerome Lejeune, who discovered that an extra copy of chromosome 21 was responsible for the condition known as Down syndrome. In the 1990s, Dr. Lejeune provided objective evidence that the full human genetic code is present in the human embryo from the moment of sperm-egg fusion. And not just a human genetic code, but a distinct, individual, unique, and unrepeatable human genetic code. It is biologically and genetically completely distinct from its mother and its father. As Dr. Lejeune wrote, to accept the fact that after fertilization has taken place, a new human has come into being is no longer a matter of taste or of opinion. The human nature of the human being from conception to old age is not a metaphysical contention. It is plain experimental evidence. What's more, the human embryo at the moment of sperm-egg fusion contains all of the information necessary to direct its own development in the way that human beings develop. This would be impossible if that embryo was not a complete, organized, whole human being. All of the best scientific and medical research confirms that the appellant's case has indeed collapsed and exposes Roe v. Wade to be one of the greatest travesties in modern legal history. Okay, so I want to hear your thoughts for a few minutes before we break. I want to hear your thoughts on this, and I also want to hear some of your questions at this point that you have about how this philosophy works, maybe parts of the philosophy, but also maybe how it might apply to different issues that you'd like to explore it with. So what are your thoughts? What questions come up? Yeah.
I really think it was interesting how you brought up the fact in the video that compassion on both sides of the fence, the pro-choice and the pro-life fence, there's a belief that we're both acting with compassion, and so that is the common ground. But depending on what principles the individual has, that plays into what compassion looks like.
Yes.
But compassion is that common ground.
Yes, that's right. Compassion can be a common ground when you're talking with somebody. Most people who want abortion to be legal, even people who are in the 10% on the other side, who are very strong about it and very vocal about it, are motivated by the desire for the good of the other, and they're compassionate about the suffering of the other. And this is when you can have a pretty good dialogue about what is compassion. What does compassion mean? Does compassion mean trying to erase someone else's suffering or potential burdens or potential problems, right, at the expense of knowing love or something deeper than the concrete physical things that they're approaching? Or does real compassion mean walking with someone in their suffering so that they can do what is noble and courageous and see the good and the loving opportunities that are set before them? Which is really compassionate? Because most of the time, abortion is attempting to erase a problem to send somebody back into their own life where they were alone to begin with, abandoned to begin with, right? Or living for things that are beneath themselves to begin with. But real compassion, seems to me, would go deeper than that. It would say, why do you want this abortion? What's the problem here? And how can I walk this walk with you? Right? How can I help you to see the good in this, even though it will involve suffering? So in other words, compassion is not always about trying to negate or destroy the suffering. Compassion actually literally means to suffer with someone else in their suffering, to find the good, to find the love, to find the noble, to find the heroic, and to live that out. That's real compassion. And in fact, the word literally means to suffer with. In Latin, cum means with, and passio means to suffer. The passion of Christ means the suffering of Christ. So the word compassion actually literally does mean to suffer with someone. It's kind of hard to do that when you are, committing an act of violence against their child and then sending them back out into the world to deal with the same problems that they had that caused them to think that a baby was a problem in the first place, right? What's real compassion? We both want compassion, but what I'll ask my opponent is, can you at least come my way a little bit to see why I don't think this is a compassionate solution at all? Right? Because you're not suffering with the person at all. You're denying the suffering. You're masking the suffering. You're trying to kill the suffering, but the suffering is still there because the fundamental problem is still there, and it wasn't the baby. It's that this person doesn't see their life as a gift. They see their life as being perfected through career or, some other choice or some other thing that they want over and above love. Can we talk about that for a little while? Most of the time, people will see your point of view and they will move more towards your perspective when you dialogue with them like that. Now, notice that I didn't have to bring up any scripture quotes, right? I didn't have to say, let's see what the first Gospel of Mark says about this, or let's take a look at this. You don't have to have any scripture quotes left at this point. You can do that later if you want to. But at this point, we're just talking about the human awareness of what love really means. Now, here's the difficulty. Sometimes people struggle with that definition of love. They won't agree with you on the definition of love being a gift of myself for the good of another. They will say, true love is me getting what I need at the moment because you can never have that. And that's the point where instead of saying, well, I think you're just wrong and you're an unloving person and you're killing people, I wouldn't talk about the abortion anymore. They need you to talk about them. That's when I would say, I think that is a really unhealthy way to view love. And I don't know where that's coming from in you, but I hope that maybe, I could help you change that, because I think you're missing out on a much deeper definition of what love really is. We had this experience once when I was debating against an abortionist at a secular college, and one young woman stood up and she said, I'll tell you what I think makes me happy. She said, what makes me happy is having sex with whoever I want, whenever I want, however I want, with however many people I want, regardless of the consequences that it provides to anybody else. And the whole crowd cheered. Yay! They thought that was great. What am I going to do at that point? I'm going to say, you're just a really selfish person, and I hope you never get pregnant because you're just going to kill everybody, and you're just horrible, and I don't want to be around you. Instead, what I said was, I'm really sorry that's all you think you are worth, because I think you're worth a lot more than that. Because that's not all who you are. You're meant for something more than that. And I want to tell you right now, everybody's cheering for you because it's exciting and it's fun to see you say something that everybody thinks is cool, and I know it feels good. But when you go home tonight, I just hope that you really think about what you just said. Because what you just said is that you are nothing more than a physical object meant to be abused by other people for their pleasure and eventually abandoned and rejected. And I don't think that's who you are. I think you're made for something bigger and more noble and courageous, that you're made for love and giving yourself away to others who are small and vulnerable and weak and in need of your compassion and love. And I think you're capable of that. And if I'm the only person to ever tell you that, then I'm glad I at least said it. You could have heard a pin drop. People were like, what? What? And I don't know where that girl went, or what happened next in her life. And so I don't know if that's, I don't know what happened to her. But I'll tell you this, what else would I have said? What else would have made a difference? There's no statistic, there's no picture, right? There's no practical argument, there's no fact above your fact that I can give her to show her she was wrong. What she needs to change her mind is a different perception of who she is. And we're so afraid of doing that in the pro-life movement. We're so afraid of that. Now I have to get personal. Can't I just hide behind my little 10 points of why the baby is a person? Can I just do that and show this to you? No, you can't. You have to get from behind these facts and statistics and reach into the heart. So we're going to take a break now. And when we come back, what I'm going to show you is how all of these levels of happiness point to all of these principles, and now you can build a rational, logical, intellectual, sophisticated argument in support of why abortion should be illegal, not just why you shouldn't get an abortion, because it will lead you to be unhappy and mess up your notions of success and quality of life and love. But we also need it to be illegal, and here's the reasons why. Logically, by principles of logic and ethics and justice, legal abortion violates every principle that comes out of level 3 and 4 thinking. So I'm going to also help you make those arguments too, right? This is not just about, going into deep therapeutic counseling with somebody on a heart-to-heart level, okay? You want to do some of that, but you also want to get into this topic of, is it a baby, right? And what's my responsibility to the other? And how should society organize itself? Okay, let's move into these 10 principles, and then we'll engage in more dialogue on these questions. We're going to go one-on-one. I'm going to have you debate me. I'm going to have you pair off and try to debate each other so you can answer these questions, and then we're going to watch some more videos, okay? So let's take a look at these 10 universal principles. When somebody is willing to embrace the higher levels of happiness, levels 3 and 4, then usually it is much easier to get them to see the logic and the meaning and the value behind these other 10 principles, what we call the 10 principles of cultural discourse. What's the first question that somebody's probably going to ask if you can get them to move into happiness level 3 and 4? Yeah, I think that life is about more than just myself and that. What's the question they're going to ask on abortion? But, right, I think that life is more about just, physical pleasure and ego gratification. And I really think we should do a good beyond ourselves, and the meaning of my life is to help other people, right? What's the first question they're going to ask? Do you have any idea? Any thoughts about where they're going to go next? Where do they go in dialogue with you? Let me back up. Let me make this a little easier, okay? Of the 10 principles, the first principle is we call it the principle of life, or the principle of how you live your life, right? How you define the meaning of your life. This principle comes directly out of happiness levels 3 and 4. And somebody who's living for level 1 and 2 is never going to see the value in this first principle. Because the problem with doing the good beyond myself is that it gets in the way of me doing the good for myself. It comes into direct conflict with that sometimes, especially on a material and an ego level. And so if we want people to accept this first principle, you have to move them to level 3 and level 4. That's probably the most important thing I'm trying to share with you today, that the biggest thing the pro-life movement can do to move the culture into a pro-life culture is to move people into level 3 and 4, or they will never buy that first principle. If they don't buy into this first principle, they will never accept the other 9. Which I'll show them up here on the board so you can see them a little better. But they will never accept the other 9 if they don't accept the first one. What is the first principle? It comes directly out of happiness levels 3 and 4. And it says, it's called the principle of beneficence, which in Latin means the good, right? Bene, the good, to do the good. So the principle came originally from Jesus. And what he was doing was he was taking people beyond what we might call the silver rule, do no harm. And that's what people were living by, do no harm. But he was saying it's not enough just to do no harm. You also have to do the good with your life. And so this principle comes from that. Real happiness comes from giving myself away for the good of other people and not from sacrificing other people for my own good. Right? Why? Can you prove this principle? Not if you're living in level 1 and 2. This will be completely meaningless. But if you agree that real happiness is going to be doing the good beyond yourself, then you don't want to violate this principle. Never sacrifice another human person for your own good. Why? Because I'm underliving my life. I'm undermining the meaning and purpose of my existence. I'm causing harm, which is the opposite of what I believe my life is all about. So this principle becomes important. Never sacrifice another human person for my good. Always be willing to give up myself for the good of another and not the other way around. Really important principle. And you can usually get people in dialogue when they're authentically dialoguing with you to agree with this principle. It's just not good to sacrifice other people for my own good. Okay? But what happens next? Where's the logical place they're going to go if they're pro-choice? I don't want to violate this principle. I don't want to sacrifice other people for the good of myself, but I think abortion should be legal because what?
My body, my choice.
It's my body, right? It's my body. It's not a person. If it's not a person, then I'm not sacrificing somebody else for my good. It's just a blob of cells. So what's the problem, right? And I would have to say, I agree with you on that if it's not a person. Right? If the unborn child is not a human being, is not a person, then I've just wasted the last 25 years of my life. And I'd very much like to know that, the answer to that question, because I'll be on your side if it's just a blob of cells or if it's just a accumulation of growth and there's nothing significant about it. So usually you need to answer this question next. Is it a human person or isn't it? Is the unborn child a human being? How do you know? Well, if we really want to establish the truth about the matter, and not just how we feel about it or what we think might be true, right? We have to look at certain principles of logic. What we really need is a logical, intelligent definition of a human being so that we can apply it to the unborn and say, does the unborn child fit the definition of a human being? So how do we get there? There are 3 basic principles of logic that a level 3-4 person really doesn't want to violate. Because without logic, without being able to reason together, we can't arrive at truth. And if we don't arrive at truth, then I'm not going to know what's good for you versus what's good for me, right? If I want to uphold the principle that says, don't sacrifice other people for the good of myself, do the good for the other. Well, what is the good? I have to know who you are and what you are in order to know what's good for you. So I really want the truth. How do I get there? There's 3 basic principles of logic. And the first most fundamental principle of all logic, upon which all other logical principles are based, is this one, the principle of non-contradiction. This originated in Plato and Aristotle more than 2,400 years ago. And in this principle, they taught that valid opinions or theories or definitions will have no internal contradictions. If there's a contradiction, it cannot be a valid theory or definition or argument, right? Because a contradiction will undermine the truth. Okay? How? Because if something is and is not at the same time, at the same place, right, in the same respect, then there's no dialogue, there's nothing to discuss. You don't know what it is you're talking about because it could be and not be at the same time. So another way of phrasing this principle is something that is real, not just a figment of your imagination, but a really real being cannot both be X and not X at the same time, at the same place, in the same respect. To violate this principle is to be illogical. Okay, so we don't want to hold contradictions. How does that apply to pro-life? It can't be a baby if you want it to be and not if you don't. At the same time, at the same place, adhering in the same substance. Okay? It's either a baby or it's not a baby. It's either a human being or it's not. Let's not violate the most basic principle of logic. And when somebody can say to you, well, why not? Why can't I have a contradiction if I want to? Why can't we agree to disagree? Well, because if you can hold a contradiction in your head if you want to. You could say it's a baby, not baby. But if you do that, we can't dialogue. Human beings cannot dialogue because everything is and is not at the same time. So I don't even know how you're using words anymore because every word means whatever it is you want it to mean at the moment. And if I don't know what you're talking about, you don't know what I'm talking about. We're interpreting things however we feel at the moment. We can't ever come to common understanding. If we can't have common understandings, we can't have rules, principles of ethics, or laws. Because all rules, principles of ethics, and laws are based on common understandings and how we're using words. And if we can't have any laws, we can't have civilization, right? It will be complete anarchy. People do whatever they want, and then they eat each other, and we're all gone. And I don't think that's what you want. So we really don't want to violate this principle. It either is a person or it isn't a person. How do we know whether the unborn being is a human being? Okay, we need another principle. We move to the principle of objective evidence. This principle teaches that non-arbitrary opinions or theories are based on what's called publicly verifiable evidence. It's sometimes called the principle of objective evidence. It's sometimes called the principle of publicly verifiable evidence. And it also originated in Plato and Aristotle. And what that means is, if your opinion or your definition is valid, or your theory or argument is valid, then you ought to have evidence for your position that other people of reasonable intelligence can verify. It just makes sense, right? It kind of deals with the quantity of evidence. Whoever has more objective evidence probably has a better definition. And in fact, you could state it another way. Arbitrarily asserted, arbitrarily denied. If I just say, it's a baby, why? because I say it is. Well, why? Because I just feel it in my bones, right? You would be validly, you would have a valid support to say, well, I don't think it's a baby. Why not? Well, because I just feel it in my bones that it's not. And we would never come to any kind of an agreement, okay? Arbitrarily, if you just arbitrarily assert something without evidence, some kind of objective evidence that other people have access to, then you can't expect other people to buy into your position. Okay. Now, sometimes, as an aside, sometimes people bring up, well, what about like private revelation? What about like when, Jesus appears to somebody, but only to that one person? Does that mean it didn't really happen because there's no objective evidence and it isn't really real? No, not necessarily. It could be a very real apparition of Jesus to a person, but it means you cannot expect other people to build their civilization around that private revelation. No one else has access to that. Nobody else saw it. Nobody else knows it really happened. There's no objective evidence for it. And so you can't expect an entire community to come around and form their laws and their culture and their system of being around your private revelation. It doesn't mean it wasn't real. But this is, for example, one of the reasons why if you're Catholic, the Catholic Church does not require you to believe private revelations, right? You don't have to believe, Fatima or have a special devotion to Fatima in order to get to heaven because that was a private revelation. And so the dogma and doctrine of faith doesn't revolve around that. Okay, because it was a private revelation. Okay, so you have to have objective evidence. In fact, there is objective evidence that an unborn child is a full human being at the moment of fertilization. What is that objective evidence? In the 1970s, a French geneticist by the name of Dr. Jerome Lejeune discovered the full human genetic code present in an unborn child at the moment of fertilization. Questions on that? Does that make sense? Okay, where do you think the argument's going to go next? You really cannot argue with this anymore, and almost every medical textbook acknowledges that the beginning of the human being is at the moment of fertilization, of sperm-egg fusion. They don't argue that anymore. But what do they argue next?
The woman has bodily autonomy to abort the child.
That she has bodily autonomy. It does go there next. But they also, yes?
That's a clump of cells.
That's just, they'll argue it's a clump of cells, but that it's a human being, right? So they'll acknowledge there's full human genetic code there. This is a being of human origin. You can't deny it. You've got a human being. But what do they mean by that? It's just a clump of cells at this stage. It might be a human being, but it's not what?
Person.
It's not a person. Yeah. They'll argue this is not a unique individual human person, and so the mother has bodily autonomy over it because it's just a clump of cells. There's nothing of moral worth. What's a human person? Why do we have these two different phrases, human being and human person? Right? Why do we need two? Yeah.
Perhaps the human person is more experienced and has his own background, and it's been molded by his experiences, and is that kind of different from someone who's just a clean slate?
In part, but does that mean then that a newborn baby is not a person?
I wouldn't say so, but...
Right, and the law actually would agree with you in most cases, that a newborn baby is actually a person. But it has a clean slate, doesn't have really that many experiences. Actually, biology would show that it does have quite a few experiences and even memories in the womb. But certainly much more of a clean slate than a 1-year-old or a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old. And if we're arguing that personhood is dependent on how clean your slate is versus how filled up it is, then does that mean that I would have more personhood than you do? Because my slate has far more experiences and relationships and interactions than yours does, I would imagine. Maybe not, but I would imagine, right? It would logically follow that I would have more personhood than you. What does personhood mean? It can't just be how filled up your slate is. Yeah.
Would it be like the ability to think and feel?
Well, ability to think and feel gives you personhood, except that an unborn child has the ability to think and feel at a certain age. 40 weeks after conception, the brain waves are already detected. I'm not sure it would be that.
Ability to live on their own.
Ability to live on their own gives you personhood. Sometimes they will argue what gives you personhood is your ability to live and think, is to think and feel, to live on your own, to have experiences.
So you say like it's a legal concept?
It could be a legal concept. The law, whoever the law determines is a person. Sometimes the law gives personhood to buildings. Sometimes it gives personhood to boats, right? Not just human beings. I see a problem. There are all these different ideas of what makes you a person, right? And they all seem to be subjective. How clean is your slate? That's kind of subjective, right? Are you dependent on the mother, right? Or should the mother have autonomy over herself? Well, that's kind of subjective too. We're all a little bit dependent on each other, or maybe even more so. What was the other one? You know, it's a legal construct. Well, okay, but the law used to say that black people weren't persons, so were they not persons when the law said so? Right? Is it really just a legal construct? What's the difference between personhood and human being? The word personhood denotes something different than the term human being. Human being is what we are biologically, right? It denotes our particular species, right? That we are a being, we exist, there are metabolizing cells who are taking in energy and letting out waste, right? And we are the being that is of the human species. Right? So I can sense, I can see, I can detect objectively that there is human genetic code, human DNA in your beingness, okay, in your biological matter. So it's more of a biological word that we use for the human species. The word personhood denotes that there is some moral worth or value to that being. But where does that moral worth come from? How many experiences you've had, right? How independent you are, what the law says about you, okay, whether you can think and feel on your own, whether or not you have arms and legs, whether or not you have a heartbeat, whether or not you have a social identity. There are all these pro-choice arguments about what it is that gives you worth, right? Moral worth, meaning worth in and of yourself that is worthy of protection by the law. Okay, so usually the word person, what the word personhood means is a being that has moral worth that is legally protectable. Okay, so that's why you have the two different terms. Human being is what you are biologically. Person is the term we use to describe your whole entire self that is morally valuable and legally protectable, not just your biological matter. All right, so what constitutes a human person? Because the argument is, on the pro-choice side, you can be a human being, but not a human person. Now, the first thing that I would say is be really careful when you want to separate human being from human personhood, because we've done it in the past. And every time we've done it, we've erred egregiously, and we now are extremely apologetic for it, right? We did that with the Jews during the Holocaust, right? Potentially a human being, but certainly not a human person. We did that with women in the United States and in Canada and in other cultures, a human being, but not a person. We've done that with children, right? In the Old Testament days, when children were certainly human beings, right? They came out of human bodies, they were but not considered persons, so they weren't even counted in the census. And a child would die, and that was too bad, but the law wouldn't necessarily do anything about it, you know, unless you had some value or worth to have a statement in the culture, right? We've done that to Native Americans. Human beings maybe, but certainly not persons. We have done that over and over and over. Every time we do this, we find out later we have erred egregiously. So we better be real careful anytime we try to separate human being from human person. But how do you know that the unborn is not a human person? You just arbitrarily claiming it because the law, some 9 Supreme Court justices decided to make it legal for you to have an abortion? Really? Your personhood is just dependent on what those 9 Supreme Court justices are deciding at the moment? Do you really think that's all there is? There's nothing objective about personhood? Because I'd like to present to you another possibility, that there is an objective definition of the human person. And here's where I would go for that. How do we know? If you really want to know what something is, what its essence is, and you don't want to just make it up arbitrarily, subjectively, based on your feelings or what's convenient to you at the moment, then we ought to have a complete definition. We ought to allow the thing to define itself fully and totally. Observe all of its parts, all of its nature, and don't exclude any of it. And then you will discover what its worth is. Okay? In that you will know, what is this entity? What is its worth? What is its value? I can't know that unless I allow the thing to completely define itself for me and not impose a subjective, arbitrary, convenient definition on it from the outside. That would be a very level 1, level 2 way of defining things. But if I'm level 3 and 4, I really want to know what you are, because I really want to know what my obligation to you is, because I really don't want to harm you if you are a being of moral worth, right? And therefore protectability. So how do I know that? This principle teaches the best opinion or theory is the one that explains the most data. And that just makes sense. Newton's theory of gravity made sense for a while until Einstein came around and had more data, more access to technology to make more discoveries about reality, and he came out with a special theory of relativity, which took the place of the theory of gravity, Newton's theory of gravity, because it explained more. Okay, so it supplanted an old theory that became outdated when new data came. And so when we want to know what the person is, then we have to include all of the knowledge, all of the information we have about a human person. Okay, how is this? Why is this significant? Somebody tell me, what is this fruit? What is this?
Apple.
How did you know it's an apple? What data did you use to know it's an apple? Size, color, right? Appearance, its physical appearance. Told you, you included the data of its biological, physical appearance to you from the outside. Okay, very good. Who can catch a bad throw? Okay, there you go. Is it an apple? Can you bang it on the table?
It's not an apple.
What is it?
It's plastic.
It's plastic, so I fooled you, right? It's not an apple. So sometimes biological data is not enough. Okay, you can't just tell physically by what a thing looks like and what it feels like and what it sounds like, what it smells like, what the thing actually is. You need to move beyond that. You need to include more data, in other words. So I'm going to give you more data, right? Now I'm going to actually tell you on authority. So now you know this is what is this? It's a pepper. It's a pepper, okay. It's a pepper. Okay, it could have been plastic except for the fact that I'm giving you authority. I'm telling you this is a pepper. So now you not only have the physical reality of the thing to confirm it, but you have on authority, somebody scientifically, somebody smarter than you are telling you this is a pepper, okay? Can you catch over there? I'm gonna throw it at you. What is it?
Also plastic.
It's also plastic, okay? So that tells you something else. Just because a scientist or a doctor or an important person like a movie star tells you it's not a person doesn't mean it's not a person. You need to move beyond the authority of other people, and we need to actually discover the reality of the thing. What is a human person, and how do we know, okay? Here is a plastic unborn baby, okay? It is plastic, but this is just going to be used as a model. How do we know, okay? If you really want to know something, what something is, you need to move beyond its physical appearances. And this is a principle that goes all the way back to Plato and Aristotle when they said you need to look at the powers of the thing. If I'm trying to define an acorn, and by the way, I've had this acorn for 20 years, so it's dead right now. Okay, so you just have to use your imagination. It wouldn't be green if it was not dead, but this is an acorn. How do I define an acorn? You could say it's 1 inch high and it has a rough cap on it and it's smooth and kind of, would normally be greenish in color and all that. But does that really tell you a complete explanation of the thing, or is there more data? There's more information available about this thing. There are certain powers present to this being as an acorn. And what are those powers? An acorn has the power of water absorption. That's something you cannot just see by looking at it. It has the power of nutrient absorption. It has photosynthetic powers where it can absorb energy, right? And it can take energy from the sunlight and turn it into chemical energy, right? It has the power of growth. It has the power of actually reproductive powers. Eventually it can actually reproduce. And those powers are present to it right now as an acorn. They're just not able to turn on because it's missing something. The next step of defining things. Appearances. What are its powers? What are the conditions that are necessary to turn those powers on? Right? What does it need to turn on those powers of water absorption and nutrient absorption and photosynthetic activity and reproductive activity? Okay, what are the conditions that need to be met in this thing? Yeah.
Healthy soil.
It needs some soil that is healthy, that has nutrients in it. What else?
Needs sunlight.
It needs some sunlight, right? What else?
Rain.
Needs some rain, some water. It needs warmth, a certain temperature. Okay, there are certain conditions that are necessary to turn those powers on, and those conditions are important. It's part of the definition of this thing. It's a water absorber, a nutrient absorber, a sunlight absorber. Okay, so that's part of its definition, but you still haven't completely defined this thing. Because what happens when you have all the conditions necessary to turn the powers on? What happens?
It grows into a tree.
It begins to actualize, right? It begins to actualize those powers. They come alive, they turn on, and they begin to grow in a particular direction. It grows the way, not just the way a tree grows, it grows the way an oak tree grows. Written within the genetic code of an acorn, even while it's still an acorn, is oak tree-ness. It already has oak tree-ness present to its nature. If it didn't, when you turn the powers on, it wouldn't know how to grow. It could grow like a monkey. It could grow like an apple tree. It could grow like, my brother. Okay? But it doesn't. It grows in the way an oak tree grows because present to its nature as an acorn is oak tree-ness. It already has oak tree as part, or at least it already has oak as part of its nature. It just hasn't grown into the developmental stage of a tree. Okay? But oak is already part of its nature. Well, in the same way, the acorn is to the tree what the unborn baby is to the adult. Okay? This is just a stage of development. But it already has personhood, human personhood present to its nature. What is human personhood? Okay? Human personhood has to include the explanation of everything that we are. And we know by looking through those 4 levels of happiness that human beings cannot just be biological, because human beings desire the transcendent. We desire things you cannot see through a microscope that have no physical, biological, biomaterial parts. We desire love, truth, goodness, justice, beauty, home, right? And when we don't have those things, we feel alienated, depressed, in crisis, despairing, depressed, right? Unhappy. And so we know there's a part of our nature that is transmaterial. Here is, I think, a much better definition of what a human being is than all these other what a human person is than all these other definitions. You have to have arms and legs. You have to have a social identity. You have to be autonomous from your mother. You have to be able to think and feel on your own. All very subjective criteria. The objective criteria would give us this. A human person is any being of human origin. Granted, if you're a human person, you would have to be a human. Okay? Any being of human origin that has the potential to achieve all 4 levels of happiness. Okay? Any being of human origin that has the potential to achieve fulfillment through relationship with God, relationship with other human beings, right? And is a biological being. So we would take in matter and let out waste. So level 1 is a part of the definition. Certainly, we're not angels that have no bodies. Okay, a human person has humanity to us, so level 1 is important. Level 2, our self-identity is important. But what manifests it, what fulfills it, is our ability to use ourselves at the service of others for the good of others. A human person is any being of human origin who has, as its highest fulfillment, levels 3 and 4. Right? That I would propose to you, that's the most complete definition of human person. Do you need arms and legs to be able to do that? No, then that shouldn't exclude you from human personhood. Do you need to feel pain in your body in order to experience that? No, there are people who do not have the sense of touch, but they can know love and they can know God. Then we should not exclude those who do not have human feelings yet from human personhood. Can you experience that? Can you fulfill yourself through levels 3 and 4 without having any kind of emotional sense connected with it? Can it just be an intellectual sense? Sure. So why would we exclude somebody who doesn't have an emotional connection, right? There are some people who don't have as much capacity for emotional connections as others. Some people aren't as naturally, apathetic as others, right? But they still have the capacity to intellectually connect with the true, the good, the beautiful, the one, right? The just. Okay? So here's what I would present to you. I would propose that the best definition of a human person is the one that includes all the data, and all the data points to this. A human person is any being of human origin that has as its ultimate fulfillment happiness levels 3 and 4. That includes everything we know about the human person, and it doesn't exclude anything. So now when somebody wants to exclude somebody because it doesn't have arms and legs, it can't breathe on its own yet, it doesn't have any detectable brain waves yet, I would simply say to them, why would you exclude somebody from the category of human personhood for those reasons if they are a being of human origin that has the potential to fulfill through levels 3 and 4? Why would you exclude them? Why? Well, because an unborn child, before a certain age, has no brain waves before 40 days. It can't even think. And you have to be able to think in order to choose the good of the other beyond yourself, right? And you have to be able to choose the good of the other beyond yourself in order to love. And so this being, prior to 40 days after conception, has no capacity to fulfill through level 3 and 4, right? Because it can't think. And then I would say to them, okay, first of all, how do you know? Can you prove that biologically, that this being has no awareness at all? Can you actually really prove that? And the fact is we cannot, because awareness is not a biological thing, right? It is transmaterial. So you actually really can't biologically prove that there is no sense of awareness somehow present to this unborn child from the moment of fertilization. Okay? But let's just ignore that argument for a while. Let's say like you could prove it, or let's just ignore that for a while. The unborn child that before 40 days doesn't need to actualize that gift yet. It doesn't need to. It's in the stage of growing and developing. Right? So just because it doesn't need a brain yet in order to go through a certain stage of development, why would you exclude him from human personhood when he fits the definition? He is a being of human origin who has as his ultimate potential happiness levels 3 and 4. Doesn't that make him valuable right now? Because he has the same potential as you do. And then they would say, yeah, but I'm able to fulfill it. Okay, but are you able to fulfill that potential when you are a newborn? No. So should we say they aren't human persons? And sometimes they will argue, yes. Okay, what about a 1-year-old? Can they fulfill that? No. So should we say they're not human persons? And sometimes they will say, yes, they're not human persons. What about a 2-year-old? What about a 3-year-old? And eventually at some point they'll usually say, okay. So it's a human person. But sometimes they will keep pressing it, at which point I will say, okay, are you a human person, right? Are you capable of fulfilling level 3 and 4 when you're under anesthesia, right? When you're on the operating table, when you're asleep, right? And they'll say, no. Under anesthesia, I can't fulfill that, but I still have the power. I still have the potential to, and that's why you can't kill me. Right. The unborn child at the moment of fertilization has that same power. He has the same potential. It's not the actualization that gives you your value and your worth right now. It's the fact that you have the potential to fulfill through level 3 and 4 that makes you valuable right now, to me. And I think that should be what makes you valuable to the culture. And I think that the law should protect you because of that. Because anything else is arbitrary and subjective and dangerous. And you will exclude whole groups of real human beings with the potential for love and goodness based on some biological criteria. And I don't think the law should do that to you. But if the law doesn't do it to you, then how is it consistent for us to allow the law to do it to an unborn child who has the same potential, is just not actualizing it at this moment because he needs time and development? Wow. Okay, let's move on. Okay, so at this point, we're usually establishing this is a full human person at the moment of fertilization. And most of the students that I'm arguing with will want to move on at this point. It's really hard to argue with that. And I don't want them to move on until I say, but wait a minute, are you agreeing with me now? This is a full human person we're dealing with. I don't want you to just walk away from this argument because nothing else matters unless you first agree up to this point. This is a real full human person we're dealing with. Fine, okay, it is. All right, then the next argument is usually, yeah, but women should be their own moral agents. Women should be able to make up their own minds about what they're going to do with this person because they have all these other opportunities and ends to actualize. They want to go to college, blah, 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 all these other things we talked about. So what about that? How does this play in? This baby is unwanted. He's small. He's in the way. He's a burden. Why should she be forced for 9 months to carry this baby when she has all these other opportunities? So now the question comes in about ethics. Okay? How do we live in community morally with one another that when we just acknowledge there is another being of human origin that is a full human person that I am responsible for? Right? If I'm in level 3 and 4, don't forget that first principle of beneficence. Right? That principle that said, never sacrifice another person for my good. The meaning and purpose of my life is to surrender my life for the goodness or my good, my good for the good of another. So how do we do that? How do we live in community like this? All right, let's take a look. The principle of non-maleficence is the most basic principle of all ethics. And the first thing you don't want to do is violate this principle when you're level 3 and 4. Male comes from the Latin meaning evil or bad. And this principle originated in Moses and Jesus, and every major worldwide religious tradition has some formulation of this principle. Avoid unnecessary harms, and if a harm is unavoidable, minimize it. Another way of articulating it is the silver rule. Do not do unto others what you would not have them do unto you. Do no harm. Okay? Why is this the most basic principle of ethics? The most foundational principle of all ethics. Is it do no harm. Avoid unnecessary harms. Do not do unto others what you would not have them do unto you. Can you give me another ethical principle? Another good ethical principle.
Do unto others.
Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Okay, that would be an ethical principle. Can you be doing unto others what you would have them do unto you if you're harming them? Okay, so you first don't want to harm them, right? Okay, good. What's another ethical principle? About don't cheat. Why not? Because cheating harms somebody. Okay, don't steal. Why not? Because stealing harms people. Don't commit adultery. Why not? Because adultery harms relationships. It harms families. It harms children. Right? It harms emotions. It harms somebody. This is the most fundamental principle because it's the one upon which all the others are based. Right? All these other principles rely on this one as its root. Don't do these things. They're unethical because they harm people. And harming people, why wouldn't I want to harm somebody? Because of the principle of beneficence. Because the purpose of my life is to do the good. And harming people is the opposite of the good. Okay? So again, do you see, I know I'm belaboring this point, but do you see how everything rests on those levels of happiness? You don't get them there, you're not going to get them to see the importance of this principle. The principle of non-maleficence. In 1973, the United States Supreme Court argued, we don't know whether or not the unborn child is a full human person. They admitted that. And they said, since we don't know, we will just make abortion legal. And they actually said in the decision, the Supreme Court decision, if you ever discover in the future that if we discover that the unborn child is a full human person, Roe versus Wade would have to be overturned. What they were saying is, if you are uncertain, go ahead and kill. Go ahead, if you don't know whether or not somebody's a person, it's okay to kill them until we find out later that we were wrong. This was the most fundamental violation of the most basic principle of ethics, the principle of non-maleficence. First, do no harm. If you don't know whether or not you're about to commit an egregious harm, you don't engage in the activity. That's why, for example, when policemen are surrounding a building and there's a bunch of drug dealers inside, right, and they want to go in and get them, they're not just going to shoot in the building because there could be children. If you don't know for sure that there's not innocent civilians in there, you don't shoot. That follows the principle of non-maleficence. First, do no harm. But what Roe versus Wade basically said was, go ahead and shoot. It doesn't matter, right? This principle doesn't matter. Well, without this principle, you have no other principles of ethics. Anything goes if you can commit a harm when you are uncertain. Okay, anything goes. But then there's also this principle, the principle of consistent ends and means. Another basic fundamental principle that was violated by Roe versus Wade. It originated in St. Thomas Aquinas and St. Augustine, and it teaches that the ends do not justify the means. In other words, you cannot use an evil method to get to a good end. Why? Because the evilness of your method will undermine the good you're trying to achieve. For example, if it's Mother's Day, which is coming up, and you want to buy your mother some jewelry because you love her and you want to show her your love and respect for her, but you have no money. So you go to her purse and when she's not looking, you steal $80 so you can buy her some nice jewelry. Right? Was that an act of love? No, because by betraying her, you harmed her. And so you undermine the good that you were trying to do by committing a harm in order to accomplish the good. Okay? Here's another example. Back in the 1930s, the United States Public Health Service conducted an experiment on adult African American males. They were trying to find a treatment for syphilis, and the African American male population seemed to be disproportionately affected with syphilis. And so they went to a town called Tuskegee in Alabama, called the Tuskegee Syphilis Project. And they gave some men placebos. You can see a guy getting a shot here. And then some men got nothing. And then they just observed the progression of the disease to try to gather data so they could study it and figure out how to cure it. The problem was that halfway through the study, some other scientists somewhere else discovered that penicillin was a sufficient cure for syphilis. And so people started giving out penicillin, but these scientists didn't want to interrupt their study. They were getting money from the government, they were getting good findings, the data could actually be useful still, even though the discovery of penicillin had been made. This data could provide maybe even more scientific knowledge that could lead to more cures in the future, maybe better cures in the future, more lasting cures, maybe a way to prevent the disease from even coming about in the first place. So when the government trucks came from the Center for Disease Control to administer free shots of penicillin to these men, the scientists met them at the perimeter, told them you're not allowed in here, did not even let the men know there was a cure for their syphilis, so they could continue their study. The ends do not justify the means. It was a good end they wanted, But now the means became evil. To not allow them to be treated became evil. By 1972, word had gotten out what the scientists were doing, and the whole thing became a huge scandal, and it erupted in the media, and they had to shut down the project. Over 100 men had died from syphilis because of this. Many of them had infected their wives, and many of their children were born with congenital syphilis, or the after effects of the complications of syphilis. They were born blind and with other problems. It's a really good example of how the ends do not justify the means. Well, the same thing is true with abortion. Someone will always try to tell you abortion is necessary because of this good that can happen for women, or this good that can happen for culture, or this good that can happen for relationships, or maybe crime goes down, right? Oh, we've seen crime go down since abortion has gone up. Right? Well, first of all, just because there's a correlation doesn't mean that there's causation. Right? And there's absolutely zero proof that there's causation. And not only that, but if you really look at the statistics, crime has not gone down. It's actually gone up. So the argument is a total farce. But even if it was, you can never use a good end to justify an evil means. And if this is a full human person, and abortion kills the full human person, and that person has intrinsic dignity, then you're using an evil means to get to a good end. So can't we find another way to bring the crime rate down than using an evil means? If someone says, no, what's wrong with doing this? Then you simply make the argument, once you cross the boundary, once you cross that border and say you can use an evil means to bring about a good end, you've just justified this. You've just justified Nazi Germany, right? They were using an evil means to bring about the good end of more people being more prosperous, right? And having a good, healthy race and discovering cures for diseases by just using a few Jews in experiments, right? They wanted good ends too. They were just using an evil means. And if you can do it in abortion, what's wrong with that? Right? You've just justified all of these evils because usually there's someone behind the evil telling you a good can come out of it. Okay? Do you really want to do that? Okay, and let's look at this last principle of ethics, the principle of full human potential. This originated in Bartolomé de las Casas. And this principle says every human being or group of human beings deserves to be valued according to the full level of human development and not according to the level of development currently achieved. What does that mean? It means the way that we value you should not be dependent on what you are accomplishing or achieving right now. The way we value you should depend on what you could achieve if you were allowed to reach your highest potential. Okay. And this principle came about by a man named Bartolomé de las Casas, who was a Spanish Dominican Catholic priest. And he wasn't always a Catholic priest. He was once a layman, and he owned slaves, the Native Americans. And he realized his errors, gave them up, and became one of the most ardent defenders of the Native Americans against the Spanish conquistadors who, under the authority of the king, were enslaving these Native Americans and torturing them and even justifying murdering them if they resisted being enslaved on the grounds that these Native Americans appeared to be lesser developed. In the eyes of the Spaniards, they didn't appear to have as advanced methods of mathematics, and their language skills were more primitive, and their architectural skills were more primitive, and their music was more primitive, and their understanding of spirituality and God seemed to be more primitive to the Spaniards. And so they justified what they were doing by arguing that these people have not achieved what we have achieved, and so they are not as valuable. And what Bartolomé de las Casas said is, you can't do that. Every human being deserves to be valued according to what they could achieve if they were given the possibility and the chance to reach their highest development, not at the level they have developed right now. Okay, why? Because the potential is real, like we talked about before in definition theory. That potential is real. It has real value right now. And if you don't agree with this, then you're going to end up having to say that all of humanity is valued in all kinds of different levels. And you never know when it changes, and it becomes completely arbitrary and subjective to the whim of the more powerful. I'll give you an example of this. A few years ago, I was debating at the University of California at Berkeley in front of 700 college students. And they were almost entirely pro-abortion, and very violently and, vociferously so. And I was debating against an abortionist by the name of Dr. Potts. And he had done thousands of abortions and was at one time the head of International Planned Parenthood, the medical unit of International Planned Parenthood. And he was arguing that, I asked him, is there any point at which you stop doing abortions, that you won't do abortions? And he said, yes, when the human nervous system is fully developed. He says, at that point, I won't do abortions anymore because now there is sensation, there is feeling, and I believe that now it's a human being. So I asked the students, does anybody know when the human nervous system is fully developed? At what stage during, pregnancy does that happen? Does anybody even know? Do you know? Is it 5 months? Is it 4 months? Is it 3 months? At what point does that happen that Dr. Potts stops doing abortions? And I had to reveal to the students that the human nervous system is not fully developed until you're at least 21 years old. Which, of course, threw into question the personhood of all 700 college students. And I had asked them, whose side do you really want to be on here? That Dr. Potts believes that he should be allowed to kill people until they reach the full development of their human nervous system? You haven't reached it yet. Whose position is more protecting here, right? More observant of what's really valuable here. The problem is it is an arbitrary, subjective, biological demarcation that has absolutely nothing to do with where your value comes from. Right? Your value comes from the fact that you are a being made with the potential for goodness, and that's what gives you value right now. Now, where does all this go? Because frequently then, our opponents will say, fine, it's a human being, it's a person, right? Logically, you can prove that. We shouldn't be killing people because of the principle of non-maleficence. The ends don't justify the means, and it has real value right now, despite the fact that it's not reached the full level of human development. Fine. But shouldn't we just allow women to decide for themselves because the law has no business being involved? And many times they'll come with, that will be the final resolution. The law has no business being involved, right? You cannot legislate morality, even if I agree with you. And that's where Dr. Potts went next in his argument. You cannot legislate morality. So even though it is wrong, you can't make the law tell people that they can't do something. Well, there's the real practical arguments, such as every law legislates morality, right? Somebody says rape is against the law. Why? Because it's morally wrong. Says who? Right? What if I need to rape somebody in order to, actualize my existence, and that's what I think that I need to do? Who is the law to tell me no? The law is legislating morality. Okay, so every law in some way legislates morality. So the argument is really kind of a stuck argument. But beyond that, how do we even get the law? Where does the law come from? How do we determine what really should be the law so it's not subjective and arbitrary? There is actually an objective methodology for determining what should be legal and what should be against the law. And if you're not following the objective criteria, then your law really is based on tyranny, whatever the most powerful person says at the time. And then you have a right of the people to revolt when you have a tyranny. Okay? Because the government is supposed to exist for the protection of the people, not for the whims of the person in power. That's the whole reason why government has legitimacy in the first place, is because its whole purpose, its sole meaning for existence is to protect the dignity and the lives of the people under its care. Whether it's a monarchy, an oligarchy, a theocracy, a democracy, a republic, a democratic republic, whatever form of government you have, the only thing that gives its legitimacy so that the people don't overthrow it is that the government is responsible primarily for the protection of the citizens under its care. Okay, so we better make really good sure that the laws the government is adopting is doing that. And there are 3 principles that help us do that. Okay? The first principle, again, originating out of happiness levels 3 and 4, is the principle of natural rights. And it originated in Francisco Suarez, whom John Locke read, right? And then John Locke comes up with his treatise on government, and then Jefferson reads it, and then Thomas Jefferson comes up with the inalienable rights, right, the Declaration of Independence, and Thomas Paine, reinforces these natural rights, and the principle says this: all human beings in themselves, by virtue of their existence alone, not by any other action or activity, possesses the inalienable right to life, liberty, and property ownership. By your mere existence as a human being, you have the right to life, liberty, and property ownership. No government gives you these rights. No government has the authority to take them away. Why? Where do these rights come from? How do we know that they didn't just come into existence because Francisco Suarez said so? Right? How do we know they are a really real reality that needs to be protected by the government? Look at your nature as a human being. Can you actualize your full, complete nature as a human being without life? If you are dead. Is it possible?
No.
Then I owe you a duty not to kill you, or you will not be able to actualize your nature. Can you actualize your complete nature as a human being without the freedom to move your will to the service of the other?
No.
because you wouldn't be able to love, and love is part of your nature. If love means freely choosing the good of the other above the good of myself, then I need freedom, I need to have liberty. So liberty, therefore I owe you a duty to protect your liberty. What about property? That's an odd one, right? Why do we have a right to property? Well, can you actualize your life and your liberty rights in a positive way if you don't have the sustenance that you need for life to exist, right? If you don't have some property, a shelter to stay warm and food, there's a certain, albeit limited, there's a certain degree or a certain amount of food and water and shelter and clothing that I need, right, in order to live out my existence and not get sick and unhealthy and die or be subservient to somebody else forever so that I cannot pursue the gifts that God gave me, to become a doctor or an artist or whatever. So I don't want to be an indentured servant for the rest of my life. Okay, so there's a certain, albeit limited amount of property ownership that is inalienable, that is part of what I need for my nature to fulfill, right, for me to completely fulfill as a human being. These we call inalienable rights, which means unseparatable. You cannot separate those rights from the person because they're part of my nature. They're necessary for my nature to actualize. That's why we call them inalienable. Not just because the government voted and everybody agreed. It doesn't matter if the government doesn't vote on it. If people disagree, if one day we vote by a plebiscite that no one has these rights, you would still have these rights because they are necessary for your nature, and that government would be illegitimate and the people would have a right to, right, engage in civil disobedience and to overthrow the government. We all have this right. Okay, then when do your natural rights adhere to your personhood? When? At what point? Because our opposition will say, you don't get natural rights until you're born, or whatever line they want to say, when the heart is beating, or when the brain waves are detectable, or quickening when you can feel the baby, or when you're born, or when you're 2 years old. Really? That's all pretty arbitrary. Why? When do natural rights adhere to the human person? Why? Why fertilization? Who said that? Why? And why do they adhere at fertilization? Because of your potential. Make it make sense. Why? What do you mean by that? Because of your potential. What potential?
To achieve the 4 levels of happiness.
So because you have the potential to achieve the 4 levels of happiness, at the moment of fertilization, others owe you a duty to protect your life, liberty, and property interests so that you can fulfill the intrinsically dignified being that you are. Is that what you're saying? That makes a lot of sense to me. Sounds objective, right? And it seems to include everything we know about the human person. Yes. All right, but now what happens next? What happens next at this point? Right? You have natural rights, the right to life, liberty, property. What are they going to argue next? Do you see some kind of a conflict here? Yeah.
Well, the woman should have the liberty to...
Yeah. Liberty is an inalienable right. So, Camille, you just acknowledged a woman has an inalienable right to liberty. You cannot take that away from her. You cannot separate it from her. So the law should not determine whether or not she should have an abortion. Well, once again, I would say, okay, but then the law should not determine whether or not, a man decides to rape a woman, or we want to enslave somebody, or we want to engage in child abuse. There has to be a limit. There has to be some kind of a way that we organize and order these rights so that we don't all just kill each other claiming a right to liberty. And in fact, there is an objective, natural way to resolve a rights conflict. Can anybody guess what it is? How do you resolve a rights conflict that is not subjective? You can't say, who's more powerful sets the rules, who's older sets the rules, who's wealthier sets the rules, who has more political connections sets the rules. Is there an objective criteria for resolving a rights conflict like that? Yeah.
Well, you can't have the right to liberty without the right to life.
Bingo. These rights prioritize themselves. This is called the principle of the fundamentality of rights, or the principle of the prioritization of rights, also called the principle of the hierarchy of rights. It originated in Francisco Suarez and John Locke and Thomas Jefferson. Francisco Suarez was a Spanish Jesuit Catholic priest who was observing that the government was frequently harming individual human beings on the grounds that they were doing it for the common good. Everybody needs this road so we can all engage in better business. And so we're going to have to displace this community of people that's living by the river because that's the best way for us to build the road. And so we're going to have to move them out. Goodbye. And now these people have lost their homes, lost all their belongings, lost their livelihood, lost their access to clean water, and they're all going to die. Okay? He was saying, you can't do this. You can't claim the common good if at the same time you are harming individual human beings, because the common good is dependent upon the individual good. And so he said, look, he originated the notion of inalienable rights, that you have an intrinsic dignity that gives me a duty to protect the individual human person first, and then to perceive the common good, and that these rights are naturally ordered. Which right should come first in a rights conflict? This is the argument. The more fundamental right is the one which is necessary for the very possibility of the other right's existence. It makes logical, objective sense. I didn't force this. I didn't vote on it. It exists whether or not we agree on it. The fundamental hierarchy of rights exists as a reality in and of itself. Life is a necessary condition for the very possibility of liberty's existence. Without it, there would be no liberty, right? If I'm dead, my liberty interests are a moot point. You can bury me wherever you want to, because I'm dead. Okay? I don't have any freedom now to decide where I'm going to be buried. I am a dead body now. So my liberty depends upon the fact that I have life. So life must be protected first in a rights conflict. The same thing, by the way, is true with life and property, which is a necessary condition for the other.
You need life to have property.
Between liberty and property, which is necessary between the right to liberty and the right to property.
Liberty.
Why?
You need the liberty in order to purchase the property.
Yeah, very good. That's right. I need to have possession over myself and my decisions into my future before I can purchase something outside of myself and possess it. I can't possess this book if I don't first possess myself. What's your name?
Alex.
Alex, if you own me and I own this book, who owns this book?
I do.
You do, because you own me, right? So if you have possession over me, then you have possession over the things that I have possession over. So you own my book. Okay? So you first have to have possession over yourself, right? And your future choices and decisions before you can have possession over objects outside of yourself. So liberty is a more fundamental right to the right to property. So that's why, for example, if you live on a hill and a tree falls over your driveway and you can't get down except by taking your neighbor's, but he puts a gate and doesn't let you down, you could go to court and they would require an easement and tell your neighbor, you have to let him down until we can clear this tree, because my right to liberty supersedes his right to property. Okay, because without the right to liberty, property doesn't make any sense. It's all hierarchically ordered. So when we say the woman should have a right to liberty, my answer is absolutely a woman should have a right to liberty, and we should allow her to exercise that as fully as possible, because she is a being meant to actualize level 3 and level 4, which is enormous. However, the right to liberty is subservient to the right to life. Life is a necessary condition, and you've got two conflicts here. You've got a real person with a right to life and a real person with a right to liberty. And to tell a woman that, you're going to have to carry this baby to at least till viability is asking her to curtail the exercise of her liberty for a period of time. To tell the child, you have to die so this woman can exercise full liberty and not have it curtailed, is causing an egregious harm that is irreversible to him. Okay? So he's not only losing life, but also liberty and property forever, right, for his existence on earth. All right, and you can't do that. And there's this final principle, the 10th principle, which clarifies even further, called the principle of limits to freedom. It originated in John Locke and Baron de Montesquieu. And it argues one person's freedom cannot impose undue burdens on another person, right? Cannot impose undue burdens on other persons or other groups. So for example, you cannot say that I'm giving you a new freedom to shoot your BB gun wherever you want, because you might shoot somebody and hurt them. And so you can't impose an undue burden on your neighbors to have to get hurt and have their eyes shot out in order for you to have this new freedom to shoot your BB gun wherever you want to shoot it. Okay? You can't yell fire in a crowded theater because you have a freedom of liberty, right? The freedom of speech, because you might cause people to bottleneck running for the exit, and then they will trample each other and die. Their right to life supersedes your freedom to call out whatever you want, even when it's not true, in a crowded area. Okay? So these are the 10, what we call the 10 principles of civilization, the 10 principles of a healthy culture. We're going to take a very quick break now so you can get up and stretch, and then we're going to put it all together and see how all these principles work together in the question of abortion. Okay? So let's break a little bit. Right, what I want to do now is a little bit of debate with you, and then I want you to debate with each other. And we'll spend just a few minutes on this because we're running up against our 2:30 deadline. And I'm very happy to continue going, and we'll engage in this as long as you want to. If you're able to stay maybe 15 minutes later since we lost that first half hour, that would be great. If you have to go, you can certainly go. But what let's do now is I want to have some devil's advocates. I want to have you come up and debate with me the way that you would, the questions that are most pressing to you, that you really want to hear the answers to, and that you really want to hear how this principle applies. So I need somebody to volunteer to start. Come on up here with me and let's show some tabling. And you're going to be the pro-abortion and I'll be the pro-choice. Okay, who wants to try? Let's start with you, and then you want to go next, and who wants to go third? I need a third person. Somebody quick, anybody brave person. First, second, third, fourth. Okay, come on up. Fifth. Okay, we need some girls. Okay, come on up.
Okay.
Okay, what's your name? Hi.
I'm Kate.
I'm Camille. Hi, Katie.
Hi. So I was wondering, so you say you're pro-life. I can see that because I understand, I've seen ultrasounds, I've seen, the heartbeat of the fetus and that kind of thing. But what really just gets on me is that situations of back alley abortions happening where women are feel like they're forced to they need an abortion, and so they are put in danger and even die.
I'm going to have you step over here away from that screen because it's getting kind of hot. But so you're feeling like abortion should be legal because we don't want women to go through back alley illegal abortions and be hurt and maybe even die from that. Is that right?
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, because I'm just really concerned about those women.
Yeah, I'm very concerned about that too. Let me ask you a question. Do you believe that the unborn child is a human being, a person? Or do you think it's just a blob of cells?
I mean, I think there's some kind of nuance because, I know that it has a heartbeat, but I don't know if that necessarily means it has the same level as a woman. Okay, well, let's just for the sake of argument, let's assume it is a person to begin with, and then we can talk about that later and kind of maybe talk about some of that. But let's assume it is a human person, a human being, and then the woman wants to get an abortion, but it's illegal, so she goes to a back alley abortionist, and then he kills her and her baby. Okay, that's not a good solution, right, to her problem, right? Do you think that abortion is the only solution to her problem? I mean, I guess she would probably feel that way because that's how she ended up in that situation.
Right. But I'm just wondering, if that is a human being and she's seeking an abortion and abortion is illegal, it doesn't seem to me like the only answer is to make abortion legal if that's a human being. It seems like, wouldn't a just, civilized society try to find other solutions for her problem, whatever her problem is that's driving her to abortion, than to make killing her baby legal? The reason why I'm bringing this up is because when you make it legal, I'm assuming that, like me, you care about women, right? And you don't want her to die. So you make it legal so she doesn't have to die. But somebody is still dying. So the idea that abortion has now become safe isn't really true, because in every abortion, somebody is not safe, right? Somebody's dying. A human being is dead at the end of an abortion. So you haven't really made it safer necessarily, right? I mean, it's still somebody's dying.
I mean, I guess, but that kind of is maybe where we differ more because, I don't entirely see the unborn baby as a person. Okay. And so it's to me, I see these concrete women who will be dead because of this.
And that makes sense. And I think, first of all, I think it's admirable that you take a position because you are concerned about the other, about the woman. And I feel the same way. So that's where it's at. We need to figure out if that's a human person, don't we? Because if it's not a human person, then I would be on your side. But if it is a human person, a full human person, as dignified and valuable as the mother, would you be on my side?
I don't know. I guess I have to think about that.
You'd have to think about it more.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm assuming that you're a person who believes that it's much better to live for the good of the other than for the good of the self, right? Would that be true? Yeah, and most people do. You know, so obviously you would recognize that mothers sacrifice for their children, and that's a good thing, right? That we don't want a whole bunch of people where mothers are living for themselves. Who cares about the baby? What happens to my child, right? So there's just a couple things for you to think about why we are pro-life, and very strongly so. One is that I think that abortion has built a culture where we have started telling people it's more important for you to live for yourself, even sacrificing other human beings to live for yourself, than it is for you to give of yourself for others. And that's what I see abortion doing. It's caused everybody to think, you know, I might get hurt, I might get harmed, you know, and I might have trouble, and so have an abortion, instead of saying, this is a human person with real human dignity and meaning in life, and the meaning of my life is to give it up for someone else's good. I see abortion has really harmed our capacity to live our lives for the good of the other, and it's kind of turned it around to use the other as an object and disposable thing for our own good. And that is one of the biggest reasons why we are pro-life. But a second reason, and you know, this is where I think you and I disagree and we should talk about it, is I think it is a human person. And I think there's lots of evidence of that. And I'd like to share that evidence with you if you're willing to take a look at it. And then I would get into the biology, and then I would get into the complete definition of the person, and then I would take it from there and see where she doesn't, you know, I would give her some of the factual stuff that we just went through on the principles of logic. And that's where I would take the argument. But I don't want to just dive in there. I want to find out what's going on here. There's a lot of confusion and unwillingness to sort of say what it is that I'm saying. What I'm saying is, if it was a human person, she should be allowed to kill it because she might get hurt. That's not really what it means to be a woman, right? And that kind of drives, so I'm trying to drive up a little bit of that level 3 and a little bit of that level 4 in her. So that's where I found my common ground. I was looking for common ground with her. We both want to be level 3, level 4. And I established that first. Now I can dialogue with her. And if she does see this as a human person, then I would say, don't you think we should find better solutions? And I know she's got common ground with me. So, okay, anyway, that's where I might take that. Okay, who's next? Come on up here. Yay, that was very good. Okay, what's your name? Isaac. Hi, Isaac.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm fine,
Good.
thanks.
Are you pro-life?
Wait, are you asking me?
No, you're the devil's advocate. Okay.
I'm pro-choice.
Oh, okay.
One thing that I would like to ask someone who's pro-life.
Yes. Did you see what I just did? I stepped towards him and I looked at him in the eye and I smiled when he said he was pro-choice. Right? Our tendency is usually to go, okay. You don't want to do that. You step towards him and smile. Oh, okay. Yeah.
So my question is, let's say, so the Catholic Church, or it's generally a religious belief that, say, that life begins at conception is kind of something that is pushed from a religious standpoint. And say someone's not religious, not Catholic, but ends up in this situation where they're pregnant and not ready to bear a child.
Okay.
And if that person's not following the teachings of this religion, then how would you?
Do I have to speak from a religious perspective? Is it okay with you if I don't come at it from a particularly religious perspective?
Yeah, how would you address the situation from a non-religious?
So if she's not ready to give birth or to have a child, you're saying she should have an abortion, or should be allowed to have an abortion?
Yeah.
And I don't think she should be allowed to have an abortion. Well, let me ask you this question. The fundamental reason why I don't think she should have an abortion is because this is a human being. Her child is a real human person with dignity and value and inalienable rights. And so do you agree with that? Because if you don't, then that would be probably where we need to start the dialogue.
Yeah, so my understanding is that perhaps you only believe that because the doctrine of your religion pushes that.
Okay. Have you ever looked at the scientific evidence of the, the humanity of the unborn child at the moment of fertilization? Are you familiar with Dr. Jerome Lejeune and what he's done with genetics to see the full genetic?
Well, no, if there is biological, that's kind of what I was
let's talk
looking
about
for.
it. Okay, so then I'm not going to go into all this, but I would take the dialogue there and I would show him, again, the evidence that there is, that the unborn child has the full human genetic code at the moment of fertilization. I would go through the complete definition, but then I would take it a little farther. I would say, okay, now, I think I've set a pretty good case for explaining and for my position that this is a full human being and a full human person. And I just don't see any strong evidence on the other side that would suggest that it's not. because you've got the DNA on my side, you've got, the biology is on my side, you've got philosophy is on my side, logic is on my side, reason is on my side. But you brought up a good question that I don't want to ignore, which is, even if it is a human being, a human person, the woman is not ready to have an abortion yet. So, I would suspect that even if we could say it was a human person, you would still want exceptions, except in this case, this woman is not ready. And I would want to ask you, what are the reasons why you think that a woman not being ready would justify the law saying she could take the life of her own child? Let's work through that. What are some of those reasons?
So, to understand, you're asking me,
Yeah, a woman's not ready to have a child, so she should be allowed to have an abortion. Why would she be not ready to have a child?
oh, maybe she's not financially stable.
Not financially stable.
And maybe,
Okay.
well,
So,
yeah, let's start there.
okay, so then my first question would be, do you really think that financial stability is what's going to make that woman happy over and above her own child? I mean, in other words, you're suggesting she sacrifice her child for financial stability, so it sounds like you're telling me that financial stability is the most important thing.
Well, if she's not financially stable and isn't able to provide properly for this child, then,
Okay.
then this child
Is going to grow up poor?
grow poor.
Is that bad?
He's going to have a miserable life. And
Wait. Now you just say he's going to be miserable. Don't you think that's kind of an assumption that's a little bit unfair?
Okay.
That child can never be happy because he's going to grow up poor. I grew up poor. I had 5 brothers and sisters. My dad made $17,000 a year, right? I had to wear clothes that were hand-me-downs from our neighbors. But I was really happy. But I think we just need to be really careful when we assume that somebody who is poor is going to be unhappy. I don't think that's necessarily true. Do you really think that?
Well, not anymore.
Not anymore, okay. So that would be the first thing, is I would really question that. The second thing is, why does a woman have to be poor? Because she's, going to give birth. Why?
It's very expensive to raise a child.
It's pretty expensive. I agree it's pretty expensive, but we live in America, right? And there are 3,000 pregnancy resource centers that provide free clothing, free food, free diapers, free medical care for these babies. She doesn't have to go without, at least not in this country, and if we're talking about abortion being legal in this country, she doesn't really have to go without. So I'm not really sure that, it's a really just argument to say she's not going to be able to provide for the baby. She generally is going to be able to provide for this baby, that you won't see the baby starving in the streets, right?
Okay.
Okay, well, and then my other question for you would be, how much do you need to provide, really? We live in this culture where everything's about stuff and things, and maybe the baby won't have an iPhone. Maybe the baby won't have the best clothes, But is that the stuff that makes this baby happy? I mean, we're so afraid of not having things that we're willing to sacrifice a human being because I can't give him stuff. But think about it. What are we really saying? My love for you is about the stuff I can give you. Is that what makes you happy? No, it's not what makes me happy. No. I don't know. That's something to think about. Anyway, what I see the law doing is the law is telling us you should legally be allowed to kill somebody if you're not capable of providing enough stuff for your baby. And I think that's really dangerous.
Yes.
Yeah. So you're going to sign here and be on our pro-life club? All right. All right, let's try another guy. Thank you. Okay. Again, I'm trying to get to the practical argument, but I'm also trying to bring in from the heart those levels of happiness. Who's next? Was it you?
Someone there.
Do you want to come up? Yeah. Oh, somebody's got to be next. Who's third? Is it you?
I think it was Conrad.
Oh, and he left.
Okay.
Can I have you? Okay. Let's think of a new argument. We've got rape and incest. We've got life of the mother. We've got disabilities. We've got overpopulation. We've got... Where's your argument? Hi. What's your argument?
So, I guess what right do you have to interfere between a woman and her doctor? If the doctor says, she's going to have diabetes, she's going to have morphine, she's going to have some disease because she's pregnant, what right do you have to tell her that she can't?
Do you mind if I ask your name?
Oh, Michael.
Hi, Michael. I'm Camille.
Hey,
Hi.
nice
to meet you. So I'm not going to let him get away with just approaching the booth and start attacking me, right? I want a human connection now. And sometimes they won't give you the human connection. I'll say, okay, that's all right. But at least he saw that I tried, right, to make a human connection. So you would be disagreeing with me because you think abortion should be legal because I have no right to interfere between the woman and her doctor's choice?
Yeah, in case she's ill and the child is, making her ill through the development of things like
Oh,
that.
okay,
So,
okay. Well, that's a good argument. I mean, that's a good position. You care about the woman, and I don't know if maybe you've had an experience, with this that might have been a personal experience with somebody who was,
I've seen
harmed
people
from.
becoming sick through it.
Yeah, and I'm really sorry for that. And but one of the things that most people don't know is that modern medical care can carry a woman through pregnancy without her, in most cases, without her having to, jeopardize or threaten or, give up her life. And in most cases, we can preserve her health as well. There are cases where a woman would be very sick. You've met somebody where their health is in danger, but almost in no case would a woman's life be threatened by the presence of an unborn child. It's very, very rare that a woman's life would actually be threatened. And my argument would be the law really doesn't have the right to tell somebody that you can kill another person because your health is in danger, So once the law says you can kill somebody because your health is in danger or your health might suffer, what we're doing is we're saying somebody else's life is less important than my health, and I think that's disproportionate. I don't think you can do that. So but that's a logical argument, and I know that if you know somebody who's suffered, it could be a little bit unfulfilling because you know somebody personal to you who suffered. So my next argument would be why? Why wasn't she cared for properly? Modern medicine can take care of women who are pregnant, especially in this country, who are suffering, all kinds of conditions, diabetes, cancer, hypertension. We can treat those conditions without having to abort the baby in almost every case. So I'm not really sure what happened to your friend, but it shouldn't have happened.
So actually,
Yeah.
there was a real experience that we
Yeah.
had somebody outside of Planned Parenthood that we talked to, that we convinced her to, but I think it was actually just a medical,
Yeah.
it was like a hospital error actually. I think that caused, I don't know, it was diabetes or something.
Okay.
And they miscarried because of it, but it didn't.
Oh,
the mother
okay,
was
she
okay.
miscarried, okay.
But it was
And
like
that can
a
happen.
medical error.
But there's actually no, doctors who have studied complications of abortion will tell you there's really no reason why a woman medically has to have an abortion in order to treat her health conditions in almost every case. Now, there are some cases, very rare, where a woman may be having severe hypertension and her blood pressure is skyrocketing because of the pregnancy, because of some complication that's occurring, and the only thing that's going to save her life immediately in the moment is to remove that baby, to get the baby out. And if the baby is too young, the baby will die, right? That would be considered a termination of the pregnancy and abortion. But in that case, the pro-life movement would say that that is a legitimate thing to do because your objective is not to kill the baby, right? It's to save as much life as possible. And so actually the pro-life movement would agree with you. I would not be arguing that we have no right to remove that child in the case of a threat to the woman's life. Yeah. Yeah, you certainly can.
But it wouldn't be called an abortion.
Well, it would be called an abortion only insofar as an abortion is the termination of a pregnancy. There are induced abortions, intentional induced abortions for the sake of killing the baby, and then there are induced abortions. You induce the termination of the pregnancy to try to save life. But it depends on how you use the word, right? We don't want to equivocate on the term. Usually when we say abortion, we mean killing the child, doing an activity that actually results in the whole objective is a dead baby. Here, the doctor is he's ending the pregnancy by delivering the baby, but he's not doing anything to actually kill the baby. To do that would be wrong. You're killing somebody. But you don't have to kill the baby, you just need to remove the baby from the mother's body in order to save her life, right? And that's legitimate because if you don't remove the baby to save her life, she's going to die, and if the baby is not viable, meaning he can live outside the womb, he's going to die, right? They'll both die. And so it's actually the first step that you need to save both of their lives. The fact that the baby may be non-viable, meaning he cannot live outside the womb on his own, is a secondary unintended consequence. You have to get him out. She's going to die. He's going to die. A good doctor would do his best to sustain life for the baby outside the womb, and if he's too young and he can't die, it's called a secondary unintended consequence. But there's absolutely nothing wrong or immoral, and we don't believe it should be illegal to terminate a pregnancy to remove the baby when the mother's life is imminently in danger. That is a justifiable thing to do, as long as the doctor is doing everything he can to save the baby's life as well, because the baby has just as much a right to live as the woman does, right? Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Yeah. A case of this would be ectopic pregnancy, where the baby is lodged in the woman's fallopian tube, which is about as thick as my finger. And then at a certain age, the baby will grow too big and will burst through the fallopian tube. And the baby will die, and then the mother will experience internal hemorrhaging and will likely die unless the doctor's right there at that moment to save her life. And so usually they will prescribe the removal of the tube where the baby is located in order to prevent that bursting of the tube and the loss of mother and child. And so that is a legitimate medical procedure to snip the tube and remove the baby and sew the tube back together again, even though you know the baby's going to die. It's a secondary unintended consequence, and you're taking the first step to remove the baby from a pathological situation that will result in his death as well.
Yeah.
So you can actually do that. Yeah, it's a good question.
Thank you.